Tonight you are about to step into a forgotten world long before civilization where every night could be your last. You stand beside a quiet valley roughly 50,000 years ago, watching the final sunlight drain slowly behind a line of distant hills. There are no roads, glowing windows, street lamps, or familiar buildings waiting beyond the gathering darkness that now surrounds your small camp. Once the sun disappears, almost everything outside your small human camp becomes difficult to see, judge, or approach with complete confidence. What would such darkness feel like when you cannot simply reach for a switch, which sounds would suddenly seem closer, and what unseen animals might already be moving nearby? Before we step deeper into the darkness of tonight's story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more calming historical journeys. While you settle in, tell us in the comments your location and local time tonight. It feels strangely comforting to imagine distant listeners approaching sleep beneath many different skies. Now dim the lights and let the final pale ribbon of evening fade completely from the western horizon. You are standing among Homo sapiens without permanent houses, electric lighting, or solid barriers from wilderness. Their world is not empty, chaotic, or primitive in the careless way people sometimes imagine. Instead, it is closely observed and remembered through years of experienced movement and shared knowledge. Night changes almost everything. During daylight, the valley seems readable because animal tracks, trees, slopes, water, and distant movement remain clearly visible across the open ground. As dusk deepens, those separate details slowly merge into broad shapes and uncertain edges that your eyes can no longer interpret easily. Harmless rocks begin resembling crouched animals whenever your eyes struggle to resolve their outlines. Your vision adjusts gradually, although humans remain poor night observers beside many nocturnal animals whose senses are better suited to darkness. Pupils widen, and the eye becomes more sensitive to faint light as daylight disappears. Colours also lose their daytime richness, leaving the landscape increasingly dominated by silver and grey. Moonlight can be surprisingly strong. However, thick clouds can remove much of that assistance and leave familiar surroundings nearly unreadable. On a moonless, overcast evening, even a known path may survive mainly inside your memory. Damp earth smells stronger after sunset, mingling with smoke-crushed plants, old wood, and nearby animal hides warmed by human bodies. Somewhere beyond the camp, moving water keeps whispering over stones that you can no longer see. Without daylight demanding your attention, these quiet noises begin to occupy much more of your awareness. Grass rustles briefly, followed by the quick movement of something small beneath dry leaves. Your body becomes attentive before your mind has decided whether any danger actually exists. This alertness does not mean everyone spends the evening terrified of whatever waits beyond sight. Darkness is ordinary here. An older hunter may identify a distant animal call immediately, while a younger listener still struggles to understand what that sound means. Children move closer to familiar adults. That gives darkness too much credit and experienced humans far too little. By 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens already occupied remarkably varied environments across large parts of the Old World. They possessed sophisticated stone technologies, complex social relationships, and flexible strategies for finding food and shelter. Their daily survival depended upon detailed knowledge of terrain, animals, weather, plants, fuel, and seasonal change. Darkness does not erase that knowledge, although it alters how people can use it. Instead of watching an entire valley, you now concentrate upon nearby faces, movement, sounds, and familiar objects. Human attention naturally gathers inward toward companions, familiar tools, resting places, and whatever illuminated space remains around the group that evening. Beyond that limited zone, the same landscape continues existing without offering much visual confirmation. There is also a curious clue from more recent traditional societies living without modern electric lighting. Researchers have observed that sunset does not necessarily send everyone directly into immediate and uninterrupted sleep. Conversation, quiet work, social activity, and periods of wakefulness can continue for hours after daylight disappears. Such observations cannot prove that Paleolithic communities followed exactly the same schedule 50,000 years ago. They do, however, challenge the wonderfully convenient idea that ancient people simply slept whenever darkness arrived. Archaeologists can uncover hearths, burned material, stone tools, animal remains, and traces of ancient occupation. A whispered story, a nervous glance, or someone waking because the wind changes, leaves almost nothing behind. The evidence becomes frustratingly quiet. Some possibilities remain plausible because they match human physiology and archaeological context, yet certainty stays limited. Prehistoric night was never a single experience repeated identically across every region and season. An Ice Age evening in Europe could bring severe cold while parts of Africa remained considerably milder. Open grassland exposed people to different sounds, winds, and visibility than dense woodland or rocky shelter. A cave carried echoes differently from a riverside camp where moving water could mask distant noises. Under a bright moon, slopes and open pathways might remain visible enough for cautious movement nearby. Under heavy cloud, those same surroundings could contract into darkness only a short distance away. Wind temperature, weather, hunger, and recent animal activity could all affect how comfortable the evening felt. The presence of children, older relatives, or injured companions might change everyone's attention as well. For now you remain between the remembered landscape of afternoon and the uncertain geography of night. The last western glow has vanished, revealing a sky far deeper, darker, and more crowded with stars than most modern people ever experience. Stars appear in astonishing numbers. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a pale river uninterrupted by aircraft satellites or illuminated highways. Perhaps recurring stars already carry stories, seasonal associations, or practical meaning connected with animal movements. Perhaps certain patterns help experienced travelers recognize direction during clear nights away from familiar landmarks. Scholars cannot determine exactly what people 50,000 years ago believed when they watched those ancient skies. Symbolic thought clearly existed by this broad period, but individual meanings rarely survive in recoverable form. What you can understand more securely is the physical transformation happening around your body. Darkness compresses the visible landscape, sharpens attention towards sound, and increases dependence upon memory and companions. The valley still surrounds you, even when its paths, cliffs, trees, and animals vanish from view. Nothing outside has disappeared. You remain inside a familiar world that has become largely invisible within a surprisingly short time. A faint breeze brushes your cheek while smoky air carries the dry scent of burned wood. Beyond them, darkness fills the valley without revealing exactly what is moving through it tonight. As your eyes settle into darkness, the first lesson of prehistoric night becomes quietly clear. Survival does not require conquering the darkness, only understanding it well enough to live within it. Around you, people begin drawing their small social world inward as the immense landscape disappears outside. Soon that shared space will depend upon one especially important source of warmth and light. Section 2. The darkness beyond camp remains immense, but your attention now settles on the warmest point within this shrinking human world. A low fire burns before you. Its flames are not enormous, and nobody wastes precious fuel merely to create an impressive blaze. Instead, the hearth glows steadily, sending small tongues of orange light upward, while red embers pulse beneath blackened pieces of wood. Every movement of flame changes the faces around it, brightening one cheek while leaving another momentarily hidden in shadow. You feel warmth against your hands first. Your back remains exposed to the cooler night air, creating that familiar prehistoric contradiction of being warm and cold at once. Smoke rises unevenly because the wind keeps changing sometimes, drifting politely away and sometimes choosing your face with almost comic determination. Your eyes water slightly. Someone shifts a piece of wood with a long branch, releasing a brief shower of glowing sparks. They lift into the darkness, shine for a heartbeat, then vanish before reaching the crowded stars overhead. Fire is already ancient technology by this period. Humans and earlier hominins had interacted with fire long before 50,000 years ago, although researchers continue debating exactly when habitual fire control became widespread. By the time you enter this camp, however, controlled hearths are deeply woven into human life across many inhabited landscapes. Fire changes the night physically. It provides warmth during cold evenings, especially where temperatures drop sharply after sunset. It creates light for working hands and familiar faces, even if that illumination reaches only a modest distance. It can help cook food, dry damp materials, discourage some animals, and create a recognizable center for social activity. Most importantly, it gathers people together. You notice how bodies naturally arrange themselves around the hearth, according to the comfort, task, age, and opportunity. Someone preparing food sits near enough to reach the heat. Another person works slightly farther back where flickering light remains useful without making the hands painfully warm. Children drift toward the safest spaces between adults. An older individual may occupy a position protected from the wind, perhaps because experience has finally earned the right to avoid unnecessary discomfort. Prehistoric life can be demanding enough without pretending every cold draft builds character. The hearth also creates boundaries. Inside the illuminated area, expressions and gestures remain visible. A few steps farther away, details begin dissolving into darkness. Beyond that edge, the night becomes almost completely unknown to your eyes. This border can feel reassuring. Yet firelight also reduces your ability to see into the surrounding darkness because your eyes remain adjusted to the brightness nearby. An animal watching from beyond the glow may perceive movement around camp more easily than you can see it, so the fire is both protection and limitation. Its presence tells animals that something unusual occupies this place, but it also makes the human group visually obvious. Researchers still debate how effectively fire alone deters different predators, especially because animal responses vary by species hunger, previous experience and local conditions. A confident hyena is not necessarily impressed by dramatic lighting. Still, flame, smoke, noise, numbers, and armed humans together can form a powerful combination. Fire does not create an invisible wall, but it changes the risk surrounding camp. The smell of wood smoke clings to almost everything. It settles into hair, hides, skin, tools, sleeping materials, and food. After many evenings, smoke may become less noticeable to the people living within it, although your unfamiliar senses recognize it immediately. Different fuels produce different smells and behavior. Dry branches burn quickly and brightly, while denser wood can create longer-lasting coals. Damp fuel may smoke heavily. Grasses and small twigs catch easily but disappear fast, making them useful for starting or reviving flames rather than sustaining them through hours of darkness. Fuel knowledge matters. People must remember where suitable wood can be gathered, how much is needed, and whether weather will make tomorrow's supply difficult. In colder environments, fuel collection can become a surprisingly important part of daily survival. A camp cannot simply assume warmth will continue forever. Someone had to collect what is now burning. Perhaps children carried smaller branches during daylight. Perhaps adults returned with heavier pieces while traveling between water hunting areas or gathering places. Fuel might also include bone under certain conditions, especially in environments where wood is scarce. Archaeologists have found evidence suggesting that prehistoric people sometimes burned animal bone alongside other materials. Bone does not behave exactly like ordinary firewood, and its usefulness depends greatly on preparation fat content and combustion conditions. It is an unusual detail. The cozy prehistoric hearth may occasionally have been maintained with resources that modern campers would never consider putting into a fireplace. Cooking adds another layer to the fire's importance. Meat exposed to heat becomes easier to chew and digest, while cooking can reduce some biological risks associated with raw foods. Certain plant foods also become softer or more digestible after heating. Yet the exact prehistoric menu varies enormously. You are not sitting beside a universal Ice Age dinner table where everyone politely eats the same roasted mammoth every evening. Humans exploit whatever environments offer, from large mammals and smaller animals to fish, shellfish, seeds, roots, fruits, nuts, and other gathered resources. The hearth supports flexibility. Near the flames, a strip of meat may slowly roast while another piece cooks closer to glowing coals. Someone may turn it using a wooden implement or manipulate food carefully with practiced hands. There are no metal pans. There are no thermostats either. Nobody checks whether a dinner has reached a precise recommended temperature before serving it on prehistoric dinnerware. Experience matters instead, built through observation, repetition, smell, texture, and lessons from older members of the group. Firelight also extends useful waking time. A damaged tool can be examined. A wooden shaft can be adjusted. Fibers may be twisted, hides handled, food divided, or equipment reorganized for the following day. Not every evening becomes productive. Some nights people are tired. Bodies that have walked, gathered, carried, hunted, watched children, and worked materials throughout daylight may simply settle near warmth and conserve energy. This is where one intriguing possibility emerges. Anthropologists studying more recent hunter-gatherer societies have often found substantial social activity around evening fires, including storytelling, conversation, joking, teaching, and ritual behavior. These observations do not allow you to copy modern groups backward across tens of thousands of years. They offer clues, not time machines. Still, the hearth creates conditions unusually suited to communication. People face one another. Movement slows, immediate daylight tasks become less demanding. Attention shifts from landscape toward companions. Perhaps the fire becomes a place for memory. A skilled hunter may explain where animals were seen earlier. Someone might describe a distant water source, imitate a strange sound, or warn younger listeners about a dangerous location. There may also be laughter. Human beings 50,000 years ago were not solemn survival machines permanently staring into the distance with heroic expressions. They were socially complex people with relationships, frustrations, affection, curiosity, and almost certainly humor. Precisely what they joked about is lost. Perhaps somebody exaggerated an embarrassing fall near the river. Perhaps a child copied an adult's mannerisms too accurately. Perhaps someone complained about smoke following them around the fire. proving that certain annoyances may truly be timeless. Language itself is harder to reconstruct. Many researchers consider complex spoken communication likely among Homo sapiens of this period, but the details of vocabulary, grammar, storytelling, conventions, and regional language differences remain completely inaccessible. Archaeology preserves stone better than conversation. The fire continues glowing while you listen to voices around you, none of which can travel across 50 millennia into modern ears. Their sound disappears almost immediately into the night, yet the arrangement survives indirectly. Hearths can leave charcoal ash, reddened sediment, burned stone, fragmented bone, and patterns of discarded tools. Archaeologists carefully study these traces to reconstruct where people sat, worked, cooked, and moved. Sometimes the distribution of objects around ancient hearths suggests organized activity rather than random occupation. Different zones may reflect tool production, food preparation, sleeping, or disposal. The camp had structure. Even temporary spaces could become socially organized environments shaped by habit and practical needs. You notice another important effect now. The hearth gives darkness a center. Without it, the surrounding night would simply stretch in every direction. With fire, the camp possesses an inside and an outside, a warm center and a colder perimeter. Your body understands this distinction immediately. The closer you sit, the stronger the heat touches your face. Move several steps away and cool air returns rapidly while smoke becomes faint and the illuminated ground begins disappearing. Beyond that, night waits. The people around you do not appear fascinated by the fire because it is miraculous. For them, controlled flame is familiar technology learned through generations and maintained through ordinary knowledge. That familiarity may be more impressive than wonder. You are watching humans who have transformed a dangerous natural phenomenon into a tool for daily life. They carry its knowledge across landscapes, teach children how to approach it, and organize evening behavior around its presence. Still, familiarity never removes dependence. If rain arrives, fuel becomes wet. If wind grows strong, sparks become dangerous. If everyone neglects the embers, the flame can fade. The fire demands attention. For now, however, it remains steady. Heat spreads across your palms, voices soften around the circle, and the dark valley beyond seems slightly farther away. The group has not defeated the night, but it has created a small island within it. Soon, though, warmth alone will not be enough. Eventually, tired bodies must lie down somewhere, and choosing that place will become its own careful decision. Section 3. The fire remains steady behind you, but eventually warmth cannot answer the most practical question of the night. Where will you actually sleep? It sounds simple until you look around the prehistoric landscape with no walls, doors, mattresses, or weather forecast waiting to assist you. The ground is uneven, the air is cooling, and every possible resting place comes with advantages that must be balanced against hidden problems. You do not simply collapse anywhere. A good sleeping place protects the group from wind, dampness, falling debris, insects, dangerous animals, and sudden changes in weather. It must also remain close enough to water and useful resources without placing people directly beside heavily traveled animal routes. That requires experience. As you move slightly beyond the brightest part of the hearth, the ground beneath your feet changes from compacted soil to softer grass. Small stones press through your footwear and cold moisture already gathers along the lowest plants. Low ground can be uncomfortable. Cold air often settles into depressions, while rainwater may collect there during bad weather. A flat hollow that looks wonderfully convenient in daylight can become damp, chilly, and thoroughly miserable after midnight. The higher slope looks drier, yet higher ground also catches more wind, which can strip warmth from exposed bodies surprisingly quickly. A sheltered position behind rocks, trees, or natural ridges may therefore offer a better compromise. People living 50,000 years ago knew these landscapes intimately. Their choices were not based on abstract survival manuals, but on accumulated observation passed through generations. They learned where water rises after storms, where animals travel, which slopes receive wind, and which shelters remain dry. This knowledge is difficult to excavate. Archaeologists can identify caves, rock shelters, open-air sites, and traces of repeated occupation. They can study hearth placement, stone tools, animal bones, pigments, and sediment layers. But the reasoning behind a particular sleeping location is usually lost. Was a family avoiding wind? Were they hiding from rain? Did someone simply prefer that corner because the ground felt softer? Such ordinary decisions rarely leave recognizable evidence. Caves naturally attract modern imagination because they seem like prehistoric houses conveniently provided by geology. Some groups certainly used caves and rock shelters, and many famous archaeological sites survive precisely because sheltered deposits preserve material well. But humans were never exclusively cave dwellers. Open-air camps were common too. although their traces are often more vulnerable to erosion, vegetation, flooding, and later human disturbance. Survival depended upon mobility, so temporary shelters and seasonal camps were often more practical than permanent attachment to one dramatic cavern. A cave also has disadvantages. It can be damp, smoky, dark, and occupied by animals that reached it before you did. Water may drip from ceilings, while cold air can settle into deep chambers. And caves echo everything. A cough becomes unexpectedly important. The scrape of a tool against stone travels farther than expected, while conversation seems to bounce from wall to wall. For a tired group seeking rest, impressive acoustics are not always a blessing. There is another problem. You are not the only creature interested in shelter. Large carnivores also use caves, and archaeological sites sometimes contain evidence of alternating human and animal occupation. Hyenas, bears, and other predators could claim protected spaces during different periods. Researchers continued debating how often humans displaced animals, avoided them, or returned after predators abandoned particular shelters. The answer probably varied widely by species, season, and location. Nobody wants that misunderstanding at bedtime. Before settling into a cave, experienced people would likely inspect signs that modern visitors might easily ignore. Tracks dropping, old bones, smell-scratched surfaces, and fresh disturbance could reveal whether another occupant had recently used the space. Your nose becomes useful. The interior of a shelter carries layers of scent, damp stone, smoke, soil, animal hide, old ash, and perhaps something more musky farther inside. Smell may warn you about occupation before your eyes notice anything. Outside, another option appears beneath a shallow rock overhang. It blocks part of the wind while leaving the group connected with the open landscape. Smoke can escape more easily here, and morning light will reach the sleeping area sooner. The ground is mostly dry. Someone has clearly used this place before. A patch of compacted sediment surrounds the hearth area, while discarded stone flakes lie near one side. Repeated visits can gradually turn temporary camps into familiar locations. This is an important feature of prehistoric mobility. People do not wander randomly across enormous landscapes without memory. They often return to useful places where water, shelter, food, stone resources, or travel routes make occupation practical. Season matters too. A pleasant summer camp may become unbearable during winter. A sheltered winter location may become crowded with insects or unpleasantly humid during warmer months. Wind direction can completely change comfort. So can smoke. Placing sleeping areas near fire requires balance because warmth is desirable, but too much smoke irritates lungs and eyes. Sparks can also reach dry materials, especially when wind becomes unpredictable. The group therefore seems arranged rather than scattered. Sleeping spaces cluster within a reasonably protected area, while work, debris, and food remains may be kept elsewhere. Such organization reduces accidents and makes movement easier after dark. Archaeologists sometimes interpret spatial patterns around hearths as evidence of structured camp behavior. Stone flakes may cluster where tools were made, while bones or other remains appear in separate concentrations. Yet these interpretations require caution. Later disturbance can move objects, and repeated occupations can mix evidence from different visits. What looks like one carefully organized evening might actually represent many separate episodes accumulated over years. The prehistoric floor is not a photograph. It is more like a page repeatedly written upon, damaged, buried, and partially erased before anyone tries reading it tens of thousands of years later. You walk toward the edge of camp. The fire behind you becomes smaller, and the darkness ahead becomes heavier. The ground slopes gently towards some water where frogs and insects create an irregular chorus. Sleeping directly beside water sounds convenient. It may also be foolish. Animals visit water at night, sometimes following the established trails that humans would prefer not to occupy while unconscious. Dampness increases near riverbanks, and flooding can become dangerous after distant rain. Mosquitoes may be another consideration. Their importance varies by region and climate, but biting insects can make certain environments deeply uncomfortable. Smoke may help discourage some insects around camp, adding another quiet advantage to remaining near the hearth. A quirky possibility appears in archaeological research. Some ancient sleeping areas may have been deliberately refreshed with new plant material, while older vegetation was burned or covered. Evidence from much older sites suggests humans sometimes managed bedding surfaces rather than accepting whatever lay beneath them. Whether every group 50,000 years ago practiced such routines is impossible to know. Still, it challenges the cartoon image of prehistoric people sleeping randomly on bare stone. Comfort matters even during survival. People who sleep badly, move poorly, think slowly, and become less effective the following day. A group depending on coordinated travel, gathering, hunting, and childcare benefits from protecting rest whenever possible. The elders know this without needing sleep science. A child becomes irritable when cold. Someone with an injured leg needs softer ground. A nursing parent may require a protected place near relatives. Shape geography. Sleeping positions might reflect family relationships, trust, warmth, protection, or habit. We cannot reconstruct exactly who lay beside whom in most Paleolithic camps, but people almost certainly did not arrange themselves like anonymous objects. You hear quiet conversation behind you. Someone tests the ground, with a foot moves a branch and removes several sharp stones from a resting area. Another person brings dry vegetation toward the shelter. Tiny improvements accumulate. A flat surface becomes softer. Wind is reduced by natural barriers. The fire remains nearby without placing sleeping material directly against it. Nothing resembles a modern bedroom. Yet the underlying priorities feel surprisingly recognizable. You want warmth. You want dryness. You want people you trust nearby. You would also strongly prefer not to wake beneath the paw of something enormous. The humour fades slightly as the night air grows colder. I begin to understand that selecting a prehistoric sleeping place is not merely about comfort. It is an exercise in reading landscape, weather, animal behaviour, and human needs simultaneously. Every choice reduces some risks while accepting others. The rock shelter blocks wind but may trap smoke. The open ground offers visibility but less protection. The cave provides walls but carries uncertainty deeper inside. There is no perfect option, only informed choices. Eventually the group settles upon a familiar protected area near the fire, dry enough for rest and sheltered from the strongest wind. The dark landscape remains close but not carelessly close. Now the place has been chosen. The next problem is what your tired body will actually lie upon. Section 4. The shelter has been chosen. The wind has weakened behind the rocks, and now your attention turns downward. The ground looks unforgiving. Even where soil appears flat, small stones, roots, cold patches, and shallow depressions wait beneath the darkness. Bare earth quickly pulls heat from your body, especially once movement stops and the night grows colder. So people begin preparing the sleeping surface. Dry grasses are carried inward, first bundled loosely beneath one arm and shaken over the chosen patch. Their smell is faintly sweet and dusty, mixed with smoke drifting from the nearby hearth. You hear the soft rasp of stems. Someone spreads them with both hands, pushing thicker clumps toward the center and removing brittle pieces that might poke through later. Another person brings leafy branches and lays them beneath the grass to create a thicker barrier. This is not luxury. It is insulation. Modern archaeology has revealed that prehistoric humans sometimes constructed deliberate bedding from plant material rather than simply sleeping directly on rock or soil. At some sites, layers of grasses and other vegetation appear associated with living surfaces and hearths. The exact methods varied with landscape and climate. Here dry grass is abundant, while elsewhere people might use reeds, leaves, soft branches, moss hides, or several materials together. You kneel and press your palm downward. The vegetation compresses under your weight, creating a softer layer between skin and earth. More importantly, trapped air within the plant material slows the movement of warmth away from the body. The bare ground beside it feels colder. Animal hides can improve the arrangement further. A hide spread above plant bedding creates a smoother surface and reduces contact with damp vegetation. Another hide might be pulled over the body, wrapped around shoulders, or shared between sleepers. Exactly how hides were prepared is difficult to reconstruct in every region because organic materials rarely survive for tens of thousands of years. Stone scrapers, however, provide indirect evidence for hide working and repeated processing of animal skins. Researchers disagree over how elaborate bedding systems were among different groups this early. Some camps may have used carefully maintained sleeping areas, while highly mobile groups relied on simpler arrangements during short stays. Season, climate, age, and expected length of occupation would all influence the effort invested. No universal prehistoric mattress that is probably fortunate for advertising. You can imagine someone proudly offering premium grass with extra leaves and guaranteed resistance to sharp pebbles. The warranty naturally lasts until the next rain. The real work is quieter. Someone lifts one edge of a hide, removes a small branch, and adds dry vegetation where a child will rest. Comfort is practical, because rested people move, think, and care for one another more effectively. There is another reason to manage bedding carefully. Plant material can attract insects and other small creatures. Old grasses may become damp, dirty, or infested, especially when a shelter is reused repeatedly. Archaeological evidence from some very ancient occupations suggests humans occasionally burned old plant layers, perhaps helping clean living surfaces or reduce pests. The interpretation remains debated. Burned vegetation might represent deliberate maintenance, accidental fire spread, fuel use, or several activities overlapping through time. Ancient floors rarely provide a convenient explanation for what happened. Still, the possibility feels strangely domestic. Someone tens of thousands of years ago may simply have decided that the bedding had become unpleasant and needed replacing. Prehistoric life suddenly resembles household maintenance without cupboards. You settle lower. The smell of crushed grass becomes stronger beneath you, joined by hide-smoke human skin and the mineral coolness of nearby stone. The fire makes a soft cracking sound behind your shoulder. Warmth reaches one side of your face. The other side feels colder air descending through the shelter entrance. Sleeping close together helps. Human bodies produce heat continuously, and grouping reduces exposed surface area while sharing warmth beneath hides. Parents and children naturally benefit from close contact, while adults may arrange themselves according to relationships, comfort and protection. We cannot recover the exact sleeping order. No archaeological trace tells you whether someone always preferred one edge or whether a child habitually pushed everyone aside while asleep. Some mysteries remain eternal, yet close sleeping probably created an intensely social nighttime environment. You hear breathing nearby, feel small movements through shared bedding, and recognize familiar voices even when faces are difficult to see. Privacy is limited. If someone turns over, others may notice. If a child wakes, several people may become aware immediately. If an older sleeper coughs, the sound passes easily through the shelter. Human sleep is flexible, and brief awakenings may include tending fire, feeding infants, adjusting hides, or simply lying awake. The bedding itself changes through the night. Grass compresses beneath hips and shoulders. A hide slips downward. Someone pulls it back. A cold foot searches for warmer space and finds another person's leg. The fire lowers slightly. Now you understand why the barrier beneath you matters so much. Without it, cold travels steadily upward from the earth, especially where stone or damp soil dominates the shelter floor. The difference can be subtle at first. After an hour, it becomes significant. Thicker, bedding also cushions pressure points, making long periods of rest easier. People may not describe this scientifically, but repeated experience teaches which materials provide better sleep. Children learn by watching. They see adults collect certain grasses, avoid thorny branches, and recognize which leaves remain useful after drying. Knowledge hides inside routine, passed quietly through repeated actions. This makes ordinary prehistoric life difficult to reconstruct because repeated practical skills rarely leave dramatic evidence behind. Yet without them, nights become colder, wetter, and more exhausting. You run your fingers through the bedding. The stems feel coarse but springy. Tiny fragments cling to your palm. Somewhere underneath a leaf crackles softly as another sleeper shifts position. The atmosphere has changed. A short while ago, this place was merely a protected patch of ground beside rocks. Now it has become a sleeping area shaped deliberately by human hands. That transformation matters. Humans rearrange materials, improve surfaces, create warmth, and turn temporary spaces into places that feel safer. Even 50 millennia ago, comfort and survival overlap. A final hide is unfolded. Its surface feels smoother than the grass underneath, although it still carries the faint smell of animal fat and smoke. You lower yourself onto it, feeling the bedding settle beneath your weight. For the first time tonight, your body begins to relax. The fire glows nearby. Around you, other sleepers settle into their places, wrapped in hides and surrounded by the dry scent of vegetation. You might almost feel comfortable. Then something calls beyond the firelight. It is distant, low, and impossible for you to identify immediately. Several heads lift. The bed beneath you is ready, but the landscape outside is still awake. Section 5. The low call comes again from somewhere beyond the firelight, deeper, now carried strangely by the night air. Nobody speaks for a moment. Your body notices the sound before your thoughts organize it. The muscles across your shoulders tighten slightly and your breathing becomes quieter without any deliberate decision. Around you, the camp listens. The strange thing about darkness is that it does not make the landscape silent. It often makes the landscape feel louder because vision can no longer dominate your attention. A twig snaps somewhere beyond the rocks. Then comes a faint rustling in dry grass, followed by several seconds of complete stillness. You cannot tell whether the movement belongs to a mouse, a fox, a deer, or something much larger. That uncertainty matters. Humans are unusually dependent on sight during daylight, but at night hearing becomes much more important. The ears begin helping to construct an invisible map from direction, distance, rhythm, and repetition. Experienced people do this better, and an older member of the group tilts her head slightly, listening toward the valley. She seems less alarmed than you are, which immediately makes the sound feel less threatening. Perhaps she recognizes it. A short clicking call comes from somewhere above. and an owl glides silently between dark branches. You barely see the movement, only a brief change against the stars. Owls are expert night hunters. Their soft flight feathers reduce turbulence and help them approach small prey with remarkably little sound. To a prehistoric listener, that quiet movement might feel almost supernatural without any need for supernatural explanation. Other animals are less discreet. Farther away, hoofbeats strike hard ground in an uneven rhythm before fading again. Something has moved across the valley, perhaps startled by scent sound or another animal. You hear it but never see it. That becomes normal after sunset. The world continues operating beyond the camp, filled with feeding, hunting, traveling, mating, fighting, resting, and cautious movement. Humans simply lose their easy visual access to most of it. Night turns observation into interpretation. Every sound carries a possible meaning. A repetitive chirping may come from insects. A splash could be a small animal entering water or something larger crossing the shallows. Leaves shaking overhead might indicate wind rather than an animal. The difficulty is deciding quickly enough. False alarms cost only attention, but ignoring a meaningful sound can be dangerous. Human hearing therefore works together with memory and expectation. You notice people comparing signals quietly. That would make a poor survival strategy. Instead, the group listens and waits. This calm response reflects accumulated familiarity with local soundscapes. People who spend years in the same broad environment learn which animals call at certain times and which noises deserve immediate attention. Modern field researchers have observed similar expertise among communities whose daily lives remain closely tied to wildlife and landscape. People can recognize species direction, weather shifts, and movement patterns from sounds that outsiders barely notice. You would be the outsider here. The valley speaks fluently. You understand almost none of its language. A chorus of insects continues near the river, sometimes rising together and sometimes fading unpredictably. Their constant presence creates a background against which unusual sounds become easier to notice. Then the insects suddenly quiet. That silence feels louder than the chirping. Several people glance toward the same area. Animals sometimes change their calling behavior when disturbed, although silence alone does not reveal exactly what caused it. Wind temperature, movement, or a nearby predator might all alter the chorus. No one panics. The pause passes and the insects begin again. You release a breath you did not realize you were holding. This pattern repeats throughout prehistoric night. Attention rises, evaluates, then relaxes again when nothing follows. Constant terror would be exhausting. People need sleep, conversation, and ordinary life despite sharing environments with large animals. Their survival depends not on fearing every sound, but on learning which ones matter. Wolves may call from a great distance. Their howls travel efficiently across open terrain, particularly during cool, calm conditions. A chorus can sound closer or larger than it actually is because overlapping voices complicate your sense of distance. A wolf pack beyond the valley might never approach the camp, yet hearing them reminds everyone that humans are not alone. Hyenas can create even stranger nighttime soundscapes in regions where they occur. Their whoops, growls, and laughing vocalizations may travel far and shift dramatically in tone. The famous laugh is not amusement. It's part of a complex communication system. Still imagine hearing it for the first time while lying on a bed of grass with no wall between yourself and the darkness. Even the calmest listener might reconsider whether bedtime has been scheduled too early. People living here are used to such noises. Children grow up hearing them. A young child may learn that one distant call means little danger, while another sound causes adults to become suddenly attentive. Fear itself is partly educated through social reactions. The same is true of reassurance. When adults remain relaxed, children gradually learn which noises belong to ordinary night. That teaching does not require formal lessons. It happens through repetition. A strange call is heard, someone names the animal, life continues. Language allows the invisible world to become more predictable. You cannot know the exact words used around this camp. Linguists cannot reconstruct specific languages from 50,000 years ago because speech leaves no direct fossil record. Most scholars consider sophisticated spoken language plausible among Homo sapiens by this period, but its structure remains unknowable. Researchers continue to disagree over how far modern-style language can confidently be projected into deep prehistory. Anatomy-symbolic behavior tool traditions and social complexity provide indirect clues. None preserves a prehistoric conversation, so the night remains partly silent to archaeology. Sound itself rarely fossilizes, yet some ancient spaces reveal hints about acoustic awareness. Certain caves possess striking echoes or resonant chambers, and researchers have wondered whether sound influenced how people chose places for ritual art or gathering. The evidence is intriguing but uncertain. A resonant wall may have held special meaning, or people may simply have used convenient cave surfaces. Archaeology is rarely kind enough to leave explanatory labels. Back at camp, another sound emerges. A small stone rolls down the slope. Everyone hears it clearly. No call follows. There is only the slow click of stone against stone until the movement stops. Perhaps an animal brushed the slope. Perhaps gravity simply chose an inconvenient moment. This is one of night's quiet tricks. Without visual confirmation, the mind supplies possibilities. Some are sensible, some exaggerated, and all feel temporarily plausible. Your ancestors lived with this ambiguity constantly. They did not have to identify every sound perfectly. They only had to respond well enough to patterns over time. The fire crackles behind you. Its familiar sound becomes reassuring because it belongs to the human space. Wood splits, embers settle, and someone adjusts a branch. Nearby breathing creates another layer. A child murmurs softly. Someone scratches against a hide. The camp has its own nighttime soundscape, just as the valley does. Inside the human circle, noises carry identity. You know where people are because you hear them moving. A cough, a whisper, or the scrape of stone against wood becomes familiar. Outside sound remains anonymous until recognized. That boundary is more important than simple distance. You close your eyes for a moment and discover something surprising. The darkness. It's hardly changed here. Instead, your hearing becomes even more noticeable. The river sounds wider than before. Wind brushes through grass in waves. A distant animal calls once, then disappears from the acoustic landscape entirely. For a moment, you understand how prehistoric night might feel less like emptiness and more like a crowded world concealed from sight. Everything is still there. You simply hear more of it than you see. The people around you begin settling again, reassured by familiarity and the absence of anything approaching the camp. The mysterious call that first lifted every head has faded into distance. But the lesson remains. Beyond the firelight, the night is filled with lives you cannot watch. Some are harmless, some are curious, and some possess teeth, strength, and reasons to move through darkness with far greater confidence than you can. Section 5 đã hoàn thành ở lượt trước nên mình tiếp tục đúng mạch sang Section 6 Predators in the Darkness. Section 6. The valley has not become quieter, but now you begin thinking about which sounds might belong to animals capable of approaching the camp. Some possibilities are harmless. Others deserve attention. 50,000 years ago, humans across parts of Eurasia and Africa shared landscapes with large predators that modern people rarely encounter outside protected reserves. Wolves, hyenas, big cats, bears, and other carnivores occupied many of the same environments used by human groups. You are not automatically their preferred meal. That distinction matters. Large predators generally avoid unnecessary injury because even a small wound can threaten their ability to hunt. A tightly grouped band of alert humans carrying spears and maintaining fire presents a very different target from an isolated animal. Still, risk exists. You hear a distant whoop from beyond the river, followed by a their call farther uphill. The sound carries easily through the cool air and seems to stretch the valley around you. Hyenas are somewhere out there. Depending on region, prehistoric humans could encounter several hyena species, including the formidable cave hyena of Ice Age Eurasia. These animals were powerful scavengers and hunters capable of processing large carcasses and occupying caves that humans also found attractive. The competition could be uncomfortable. Archaeologists sometimes discover human artifacts and hyena remains within the same caves, though not necessarily from exactly the same moment. Layers can represent alternating occupation over long periods. Researchers still debate how directly humans and large carnivores competed for individual shelters and carcasses in many locations. Sometimes people probably avoided predators. Sometimes predators avoided people. Sometimes both arrived at the same useful place during different seasons and left confusing evidence for archaeologists thousands of generations later. A low growl would settle the argument quickly tonight. For now none comes. The fire crackles, sending a brief tongue of light across nearby stones. Someone quietly adds a branch without allowing the flames to become unnecessarily large. You notice several spears resting within easy reach. Their presence does not mean everyone expects an attack. Tools needed during the day simply become useful protection when darkness reduces visibility. The wooden shafts feel smooth from repeated handling. Some may carry carefully shaped stone points, while others could rely upon hardened wooden tips depending on region and purpose. Hunting technology around 50,000 years ago was varied and increasingly sophisticated among several human populations. Weapons change predator calculations, so does group size. A solitary human moving at night presents one level of vulnerability, while several adults standing together create a much more difficult challenge. Loud voices, thrown objects, fire, and coordinated movement can make approaching humans costly. This may help explain an important pattern. Humans are physically unimpressive compared with many Ice Age predators when judged one body against another. You have neither enormous claws nor exceptional speed. You do have cooperation. That advantage becomes especially meaningful at night. One person hears movement, another wakes. Several people respond. Information passes through the group faster than any single sleeper could manage alone. The predator confronts a social organism. A wolf pack understands something similar from its own perspective, because wolves also depend heavily upon cooperation. Perhaps that is one reason human relationships with wolves eventually became so unusual. Domestication lies somewhere beyond the world you are visiting, although its precise timing remains disputed. Genetic and archaeological evidence suggests the relationship developed gradually rather than through one dramatic prehistoric friendship. No one simply invited a wolf home. The reality was likely stranger and slower. Some wolves may have begun exploiting food scraps around human camps, with less fearful individuals gaining an advantage near people. Over many generations, changing behavior could eventually create populations increasingly distinct from wild wolves. Whether anything resembling that process has started by exactly 50,000 years ago remains highly uncertain. Tonight, wolves remain part of the darkness. A distant howl rises, another answers. The sound is beautiful when you know you are surrounded by companions. It might feel considerably less poetic if you were walking alone through the valley. Children near the bedding barely react. They have heard these calls before. Fear depends partly upon familiarity, and people raised within predator-rich landscapes learn how to distinguish ordinary presence from unusual behavior. A distant animal is information. An approaching animal is different. You begin noticing how everyone listens for change rather than merely sound. Calls growing closer, repeated movement in grass, nervous behavior among nearby prey animals, or sudden silence might indicate worth investigating. The camp function through patterns. This is where fire becomes complicated. Modern experiments and observations suggest flames can deter some wild animals, but fire is not a magical barrier. Species react differently, and hungry or habituated predators can overcome their caution. Smoke, noise, numbers, and weapons probably matter alongside flame. Scholars disagree about how much protection Paleolithic hearths alone provided against large carnivores. Archaeological evidence can prove that fire existed, but it cannot easily reveal what a lion thought about approaching it. That thought experiment is probably safer than conducting the interview. A rustle appears near the camp perimeter. Several heads turn. This time the sound continues. Dry stems bend in a slow sequence, moving across the slope rather than directly toward you. Something fairly large is walking behind the vegetation. You hear breathing. Then a dark shape briefly crosses an opening, illuminated by starlight. A deer. Its body pauses, ears upright before moving rapidly away. Tension releases. Nobody celebrates. False alarms are simply part of living, where incomplete information must be interpreted continuously. Predators are not the only reason deer become nervous, but their behavior can provide useful clues. Humans who observe prey animals closely may recognize when movement differs from ordinary feeding or travel. Birds can serve similarly. Alarm calls reveal disturbances you cannot see. This knowledge develops slowly across childhood and adulthood, becoming embedded in stories, warnings, gestures, and routines. You begin realizing how much prehistoric safety depends on attention. There are no fences around camp, no locked doors, no emergency. Yet the absence of modern barriers does not mean people are helpless. The group chooses defensible sleeping areas, keeps tools nearby, uses fire stays together, and understands local animal behavior far better than you do. Predators are dangerous, but danger is managed. That is different from safety. Near the shelter entrance, one adult remains sitting while others begin relaxing again. You cannot tell whether this person is intentionally standing watch or simply not sleepy. That distinction will matter later. For now, the wakeful figure listens while working quietly with a wooden shaft. A few embers shift. The smell of smoke thickens briefly. From far beyond the river comes another hyena call. This time nobody moves. Experience has already placed the sound at a reassuring distance. Big cats would present a different challenge because many hunt quietly. Lions once occupied much broader ranges across parts of Eurasia than they do today, while leopards and other large cats shared numerous prehistoric environments. Silence can therefore be ambiguous. A predator does not always announce itself. This makes camp placement important again. Open visibility near sleeping areas can reduce the chance of something approaching unseen. dense brush immediately beside camp may offer concealment to animals as well as humans. Someone earlier cleared loose vegetation nearby. Perhaps that was intentional. Perhaps the area was simply convenient. Archaeology cannot always separate sensible preparation from coincidence. Still, repeated survival favors habits that work. Groups ignoring obvious predator signs would face consequences eventually, while knowledge accumulated by successful communities could pass from older members toward younger ones. Culture becomes protection. A child does not personally need to discover that fresh large cat tracks near water are concerning if an adult can explain them first. This is one of humanity's quiet strengths. You inherit lessons without paying every original price. The night continues deepening. The stars now appear almost painfully bright beyond the smoke, while the earth below becomes a nearly continuous field of darkness. You cannot see the wolves. You cannot see the hyenas. Perhaps no dangerous animals anywhere near the camp. Yet their possible presence shapes behavior anyway. Spears remain close. The fire remains maintained. People sleep together. No one wanders casually into darkness, because nature has provided a wonderfully scenic evening. Survival rarely rewards unnecessary sightseeing. Still, the atmosphere is not dominated by panic. Someone whispers. Another person shifts under a hide. A child has already fallen asleep despite the distant predators, proving that familiarity can make even an Ice Age night ordinary. You settle back onto the grass bedding. Your hand rests close to a wooden shaft, though you doubt your prehistoric companions need your help. Their confidence comes from experience rather than bravery performed for an audience. The valley belongs to predators too. Humans survive here not by removing them, but by learning how to share dangerous landscapes without becoming easy opportunities. And as your breathing slows again, the fire beside you becomes more important than ever, because long before dawn, those flames will begin to weaken. Someone will have to keep them alive. Section 7. The flames have already lowered since you last looked toward the hearth. What seemed bright and steady earlier has become quieter, with fewer tongues of fire rising above the wood. Red embers still glow beneath a thin crust of grey ash, but the heat no longer reaches as far across the sleeping area. Someone notices immediately. A wakeful adult shifts closer, lifts a half-burned branch, and carefully moves the coals together. The action is gentle, because careless movement can scatter embers or waste the heat already stored within them. This is another kind of nighttime work. Keeping fire alive is less dramatic than making it, yet it may be more important during a long, cold night. A small bed of glowing coals can preserve heat for hours when arranged carefully and protected from wind. The goal is not constant flame. Flames consume fuel quickly. Embers are slower, quieter, and often more useful when everyone is trying to rest. Dense wood can smolder beneath ash, holding enough heat to revive the fire later. You feel the change when another branch is added. For several moments, nothing happens. Then, a faint ribbon of smoke rises, carrying the sharp smell of warming bark. Tiny orange points appear along one edge before a small flame curls upward. The fire breathes again. No one applauds. This is ordinary competence, yet the ordinary nature of the act hides how valuable it is. Starting fire from nothing can require dry material, suitable tools, practice technique, and favorable conditions. Different prehistoric populations probably use different methods. Percussion with suitable stones and minerals could create sparks, while friction methods may have been possible with dry wood and enough skill. Archaeological evidence for the exact techniques used 50,000 years ago remains incomplete because many necessary materials decay. Researchers still argue over how frequently Paleolithic people created fire directly instead of transporting or preserving existing flame. The distinction matters. If making fire is difficult under wet, cold, or windy conditions, then maintaining embers becomes especially valuable. A group may carry glowing material between camps or protect coals carefully through the night. The evidence is tantalizing but fragmentary. Fire does not preserve its own instruction manual. You watch the person beside the hearth push ash over part of the coals. At first this seems strange. Surely covering fire would extinguish it. But a layer of ash can insulate embers, reducing oxygen enough to slow combustion without always eliminating heat completely. Properly managed coals can remain alive beneath the surface much longer than exposed flames. It is prehistoric energy storage. Crude perhaps, but effective. The ash feels warm when your hand moves near it, while the air just beyond the hearth feels noticeably colder. The difference reminds you how much temperature can fall after midnight, especially under clear skies. Cold settles slowly. You do not always notice it at first. Then your fingers begin feeling stiff. The tip of your nose cools and every exposed patch of skin becomes more aware of moving air. The hides around sleeping bodies are pulled closer. Fire makes that cold manageable. Without it, warmth must come entirely from clothing, bedding, body heat, shelter, and activity. In some environments, those resources may be enough. In others, losing the hearth would be miserable, perhaps dangerous. A strong wind suddenly moves through the shelter entrance and bends the small flame sideways. Sparks will rise and scatter across the dirt before going dark. The firekeeper reacts quickly. A branch is repositioned and loose dry material is moved farther away. Wind is helpful when reviving reluctant coals, but too much can accelerate burning or carry sparks into bedding. Fire requires balance. Too little air and it fades. Too much and fuel disappears quickly. This practical knowledge becomes especially important when wood is scarce. In open steppe or tundra environments, suitable fuel may be difficult to gather, forcing people to use shrubs, driftwood, bone, or whatever combustible materials the landscape offers. A large, cheerful bonfire would be wasteful. The prehistoric hearth is often economical. Every branch represents labor. Someone had to locate it, break it, carry it, and decide whether to burn it now or save it for later. Fuel collection therefore links daylight planning with nighttime survival. You remember the bundles gathered earlier. What looked like ordinary sticks now seem more valuable. The driest pieces are kept sheltered, where dew cannot easily soak them. Smaller twigs remain nearby for reviving weak coals, while heavier wood is reserved for longer burning. This resembles budgeting. Only the currency is warmth. One quirky possibility is that people sometimes transported fire itself. Ethnographic accounts from more recent traditional societies describe glowing embers or smouldering materials being carried during travel, often wrapped or contained, so they remain alive without producing open flame. You cannot assume Paleolithic groups used exactly the same methods. Still, the principle is simple enough to imagine. Carrying an ember can be easier than creating fire after reaching a new camp, particularly when weather turns unpleasant. That would make fire almost portable, not in a lantern, more like a carefully protected piece of yesterday. The thought feels intimate. A flame at tonight's camp might descend in a practical sense from fire maintained through previous stops. One hearth could become another through transported embers linking movement across the landscape. Whether such continuity occurred regularly is unknown, but the possibility changes how you view the glowing coals. They are not merely objects. They are maintained processes. Fire exists only while someone keeps conditions favorable. That may explain why responsibility matters. The person beside the hearth is still awake, though. Others now breathe deeply beneath hides. Perhaps this adult naturally sleeps later. Perhaps someone else will wake and take over. Maybe no formal watch exists at all. Human sleep rarely moves in perfect unison. Different people drift in and out of wakefulness through the night, creating opportunities to notice declining fire without assigning a dedicated guard. This possibility will matter soon. For now, your attention stays on the coals. A child turns beneath a hide and murmurs. The firekeeper glances over, then returns to the hearth. Another piece of wood is placed carefully against the glowing center. It catches slowly. The smell changes from cool smoke to warmer resin and dry bark. A quiet crack follows as trapped moisture or gases escape the heating wood. The sound seems enormous in the silence. Then the valley answers with distant wind. No predator calls nearby, only the fire breathing softly. You begin understanding why the hearth may carry emotional meaning alongside practical value. It defines human presence within. Darkness produces a familiar sound and offers something predictable in an unpredictable landscape. But researchers must be cautious here. It's tempting to assign deep symbolism to every ancient fire, because modern people find flames hypnotic and comforting. Archaeology cannot reveal every emotional association attached to a hearth 50,000 years ago. Sometimes fire was probably meaningful. Sometimes it was simply cold. Both can be true. The person tending the coals rubs hands together, then stretches stiff shoulders. Night work is still work even when performed quietly. Fatigue creates risk. Someone who sleeps too deeply may miss a fading fire. Someone who adds too much fuel may burn through the supply before dawn. Experience reduces these mistakes. Children observe adults handling coals carefully, learning which pieces are safe to move and which surfaces remain dangerously hot. They learn how smoke behaves when wind changes. Knowledge accumulates through repetition. Eventually, no one needs to explain every action. The body remembers. The fire drops again, but this time you recognize the pattern without concern. Beneath the darkened wood, embers remain strong. They do not need to blaze. They only need to survive. Hour after hour, that becomes the task. Preserve enough heat. Use enough fuel. Avoid sparks. Notice the wind. Let sleepers remain warm. The rhythm is almost soothing. You lie deeper into the bedding while red light pulses faintly against the shelter wall. The adult beside the hearth settles back, apparently satisfied. For a while, nobody tends the fire. Still, it remains alive. And perhaps that is the quiet achievement of prehistoric night, not creating something spectacular, but preserving something fragile until morning. Soon another person will stir. The question is whether that waking is accidental, habitual, or part of a pattern the whole group understands. Section 8. Another sleeper moves beneath a hide, then slowly sits upright without any obvious alarm. The fire has not gone out. Nothing dangerous appears to have approached the camp. The person simply seems awake now, looking toward the embers, while everyone else remains scattered between sleep and quiet movement. Perhaps this happens often. Human sleep does not always arrive as one uninterrupted block stretching neatly from darkness until sunrise. Even today, people wake, briefly change position, listen, 10 children drink tea, or dream, or simply remain conscious for a while before sleeping again. Prehistoric nights may have been equally uneven. You watch the newly awakened adult adjust the hide around her shoulders. She adds a small branch to the hearth, checks the surrounding darkness, then sits without speaking. Nobody assigned her a shift. At least you heard no discussion. Yet her waking provides something useful to everyone else. For the next few minutes, another pair of eyes and ears remains active while most of the group rests. This raises an intriguing question. Did Paleolithic groups deliberately organize nighttime watches? The answer is uncertain. Archaeologists rarely find evidence capable of proving that someone was officially responsible for staying awake at a particular hour. A sleeping schedule leaves no stone tool bone fragment or recognizable mark in sediment. Some researchers therefore look towards sleep biology and ethnographic comparisons. Studies of more recent hunter-gatherer communities have found that groups can display naturally staggered sleep patterns because individuals fall asleep and wake at different times. Age, activity, temperature, social habits, and personal circadian rhythms all contribute to this variation. That creates accidental surveillance. Even when nobody intends to guard the camp, someone may often be awake. One widely discussed idea suggests mixed-age groups benefit especially from this pattern. Younger adults often prefer later sleep times, while older adults tend to wake earlier. Modern researchers sometimes call this the poorly sleeping grandparent effect, although the reality is far less insulting than the name sounds. Different body clocks overlap. The group gains coverage. 10 or 20 people resting together. One child wakes and needs comforting. Someone else is still talking quietly near the fire. An older adult rises before dawn. Perfect simultaneous sleep becomes unlikely. For prehistoric communities, that irregularity could offer practical advantages without requiring formal organization. Predators, fire weather, and unfamiliar noises would be more likely to attract attention if somebody remained conscious. Still, you should be careful. Observations of living populations cannot simply be copied backward 50,000 years. Modern hunter-gatherers live in contemporary ecological, political, and social conditions, even when their subsistence practices differ greatly from industrial societies. They are not fossils. Their behavior can suggest possibilities, not provide direct photographs of Paleolithic life. Scholars continue debating how confidently present-day sleep studies can illuminate deep human prehistory. The underlying biology may be ancient, but cultural habits surrounding sleep can change considerably. What feels convincing tonight remains partly hypothetical. The woman beside the fire yawns. Apparently the night watch is not exactly military. She leans backward, listening to the valley while rubbing one ankle. Her posture suggests someone temporarily awake rather than a ceremonial guardian protecting civilization. That may actually be more realistic. The safest prehistoric night might emerge from overlapping ordinary behavior rather than rigid shifts. A child wakes nearby. There is a small rustle, then a soft sound of complaint. An adult reaches across the bedding, pulls the child closer, and whispers something too quiet for you to understand. Within moments, both settle again. That brief interruption adds another watcher to the camp. Parenting does not stop after sunset. Infants and young children wake frequently, and caregiving may produce repeated periods of adult alertness throughout the night. Nursing, comforting, adjusting bedding, and responding to cold can fragment sleep considerably. This creates vigilance almost accidentally. Not pleasant vigilance, perhaps. Any exhausted parent would probably prefer the predator problem to arrange itself until morning. Yet these awakenings mean camps are rarely completely unconscious. Temperature adds another rhythm. The coldest part of the night often arrives near dawn after hours of heat escaping from the ground beneath clear skies. People may wake as hides shift or embers weaken. Someone notices. Someone moves closer to warmth. Someone adds fuel. The entire camp breathes through cycles of sleep and awareness. I'll begin listening to those cycles now. One person snores lightly. Another turns and coughs once. The woman near the hearth scratches the ground with a stick, exposing brighter embers beneath grey ash. Nothing dramatic happens. That is precisely the point. Night safety may depend upon hundreds of uneventful moments when someone happens to be awake enough to notice that everything remains normal. The fire produces a soft click. A distant owl calls. Grass moves briefly downhill. The awake woman looks toward the sound, waits, then relaxes. She does not wake everyone. False alarms would destroy rest. Experienced vigilance requires knowing when not to react. This skill matters. If every unusual noise caused the entire group to rise with weapons, nobody would function well the following day. People must balance awareness against the biological need for sleep. Sleep itself is essential. It supports memory, immune function, emotional regulation, physical recovery, and learning. Humans cannot simply decide that dangerous landscapes make sleep optional. Evolution must work with vulnerability. During sleep, awareness decreases, muscles relax, reaction becomes slower. Grouping offers one solution. Shelter provides another. Fire adds another. Staggered waking may contribute yet another layer. No single defense needs to be perfect. Together they reduce risk. There is even a quirky modern parallel, sometimes called the Sentinel hypothesis, suggesting groups of humans may naturally maintain some level of collective nighttime vigilance through varied sleep timing. The idea sounds almost deliberately prehistoric, yet researchers still disagree about its evolutionary significance and how broadly it applies beyond particular populations. Differences in sleep timing may result from many factors without existing specifically because they protected ancestral camps. Evolutionary stories are seductive. They can become too neat. You remind yourself that people 50,000 years ago did not sleep according to theories written about them later. They simply became tired, woke, dreamed, cared for children, listened to animals, and adjusted themselves to whatever the night required. Another person now rises. The woman by the hearth looks at him briefly and finally lies down. There is no formal exchange. Still one wakeful person replaces another. Perhaps coincidence explains it. Perhaps long familiarity means no words are necessary. The new sitter stretches, takes a drink, and remains near the edge of the sleeping area. He looks toward the stars before glancing across the dark valley. A faint breeze moves smoke sideways. He shifts position. The camp continues sleeping. I begin to understand that being asleep and being awake are not two perfectly separate conditions for a group. Across many bodies, consciousness rises and falls like small overlapping waves. Someone is always nearer the surface. A dream ends. A child turns or a child's turn. An elder opens his eyes. A firekeeper checks the embers. The night never fully owns everyone at once. That may be one reason human communities can rest in dangerous environments without building fortress walls. Security comes partly from numbers and partly from differences between individuals. Age becomes useful. So does variation. The person who sleeps poorly tonight may become everyone else's quiet advantage. Not every trait needs to look heroic. Sometimes survival belongs to the person who simply wakes at inconvenient hours. The idea has a certain prehistoric humor. You lie beneath your hide listening to slow breathing around you. The fire now glows only faintly, but someone remains awake beside it. Your own eyelids grow heavier. You know that if you sleep, others will stir later. If they sleep, someone else will wake. The camp moves through darkness, not as a single sleeping body, but as many overlapping rhythms. And in those quiet intervals of wakefulness, people have time for more than vigilance. They have time to comfort children, exchange whispers, remember the day, and remain close to those sleeping beside them. Section 9. The night has become quieter now, but the camp itself still moves with the small rhythms of human closeness. A child shifts beneath a hide. Someone nearby wakes just enough to pull the covering back over the child's shoulders, then settles again without speaking. The gesture lasts only a few seconds yet. It reveals something important about surviving darkness. You are not sleeping alone. Around you, bodies lie close enough that warmth, movement, breathing, and whispered sounds pass easily from one person to another. There are no private rooms separating parents, children, siblings, elders, companions, and other members of the group. Night is intensely social. You can smell smoke trapped within animal hides and the faint earthy scent of crushed grasses underneath. Warm skin-dried plants, ash, and old leather blend into one close atmosphere. The arrangement might feel crowded to you. For the people here, it may simply feel normal. Human children are unusually dependent compared with many other mammals. They require years of feeding, protection, teaching, carrying, and social attention before becoming independent adults. That dependence shapes the entire group. A young child cannot simply be placed somewhere convenient while everyone else worries about survival. Someone must notice when the child is cold, frightened, hungry, restless, or ill, and that someone may not always be a parent. Anthropologists often emphasize the importance of cooperative childcare in human societies where grandparents, siblings, relatives, and other trusted adults can help raise children. This pattern may have deep evolutionary roots, although researchers still debate exactly when extensive cooperative caregiving became central to human life. The archaeological record cannot show every embrace. Still, human biology offers clues. Loom childhood, slow development, complex learning, and high energetic demands all favor social support. Raising children becomes easier when care is distributed across a network rather than carried entirely by one exhausted adult. You see that possibility beside you. A toddler begins to stir. Before the nearest parent fully wakes, an older child reaches over and touches the toddler gently. The movement is automatic, almost practiced. The toddler settles. No ceremony follows. Ordinary care rarely looks impressive from the outside. Yet thousands of such small acts may help hold a community together. The fire gives a weak pulse of orange light across several sleeping faces. You notice age differences that daylight activity made easier to overlook. One person had deeply lined skin. Another is barely old enough to walk. Between them lie adults whose bodies carry the physical demands of travel hunting, gathering and tool-making, food preparation, carrying, and repeated exposure to weather. Night gathers every generation together. Older adults may be especially valuable. In mobile societies, long experience can preserve information about distant water sources, seasonal animal movements, difficult terrain, dangerous plants, useful raw materials, and past weather patterns. Memory becomes a resource. An elder who moves more slowly may still possess knowledge that saves younger people enormous effort. The group does not measure usefulness only through speed or physical strength. Researchers have discussed the growing presence of older adults in Upper Paleolithic populations. Although estimates based on skeletal remains are difficult and sometimes disputed, preservation is uneven age, estimation is imperfect, and small samples can distort the picture. So the exact demographic pattern remains uncertain. Still, some individuals clearly survived injuries, illnesses, or physical limitations that would have made solitary life extremely difficult. That suggests support. Perhaps food was shared. Perhaps injured people were helped while traveling. Perhaps companions adjusted daily routines when someone could not contribute normally. Archaeology sometimes reveals healed injuries in ancient skeletons, evidence that a person survived long after the original trauma. Such cases cannot reveal exactly who provided assistance, but they remind you that survival was often social. Compassion leaves indirect traces. You hear a soft cough nearby. An older man turns on to one side while someone beside him adjusts the hide around his back. The night air has cooled noticeably and the edge of the bedding feels colder beneath your hand. Bodies move closer. Shared warmth becomes practical. When several people sleep near one another, blankets or hides can trap warmth more effectively than isolated coverings. Children benefit especially because smaller bodies lose heat relatively quickly. This closeness also provides reassurance. Darkness outside remains full of sounds that a young child does not yet understand. A familiar hand, voice, smell, or breathing pattern can signal safety long before language explains anything. Human attachment is ancient. Exactly how prehistoric families were organized remains harder to know. Some groups may have included stable pair bonds, extended relatives, temporary visitors, adopted individuals, or people connected through alliances rather than close ancestry. Human social systems vary enormously even among recent hunter-gatherer communities. Scientists therefore avoid assuming one universal Paleolithic family model. You should too. The people around this hearth may not fit neatly into modern categories. Kinship could be understood through biological relationships, partnership, residence, obligation, friendship exchange, or combinations that leave no archaeological label. What matters tonight is connection. Someone belongs enough to be protected. Someone trusts enough to sleep. That trust is extraordinary when you think about it. Sleep makes you helpless. You cannot monitor the whole valley. You cannot defend yourself instantly. You depend on others to notice danger, maintain for comfort children, and respond if something changes. Every sleeping body makes a quiet social agreement. I will close my eyes because you are here. That agreement may be one of humanity's oldest forms of security. A quirky detail emerges from more recent hunter-gatherer studies where sleeping arrangements can shift depending on temperature relationships, visitors, infant care, and camp organization. People may sleep remarkably close together compared with modern households. The idea of personal sleeping space can be culturally flexible. Your prehistoric companions would probably find some modern bedrooms enormous. One person occupying an entire room surrounded by pillows might look less like comfort and more like a serious breakdown in group planning. The thought almost makes you smile. Here every patch of sheltered ground matters. Every hide requires labor. Every warm body contributes something to the nighttime environment. Children also learn while lying awake. A whispered conversation between adults may carry information about tomorrow's route or yesterday's hunt. A child listening nearby absorbs names, places, warnings, jokes, relationships, and social rules without receiving any formal lesson. Culture enters through overheard life. Historians and archaeologists cannot recover those exact nighttime conversations, but language learning itself must have depended on constant social exposure. Young humans become skilled by being surrounded by skilled humans. The process continues during darkness. A child hears an animal call. An adult names it. Someone explains whether it matters. Fear becomes knowledge. Knowledge becomes confidence. The transformation may take years. You notice another sleeper waking briefly and reaching for water. She drinks, checks the child beside her, then lies down again. No one seems entirely separate. Even resist contains attention to others. Of course, closeness also creates irritation. Someone snores. Someone steals part of a hide. A child kicks unexpectedly. Another sleeper grumbles and shifts several inches away. Prehistoric social life was not permanently harmonious, simply because cooperation mattered. Familiarity creates affection, but it also creates countless opportunities to become annoyed. Humans remain human. Arguments almost certainly happened. Jealousy probably happened. Impatience, teasing, loyalty, grief, affection, and reconciliation likely existed within these relationships, even if their exact forms are inaccessible. You do not need to imagine perfect harmony. You only need enough cooperation. That distinction matters. A group can contain tension and still share food, defend children, move together, and sleep beside one another. The fire gives another small crack. A spark rises and disappears. Someone murmurs in sleep and another person quietly laughs before becoming still again. You cannot know whether the murmur contained words. Perhaps it was part of a dream. Perhaps it was only sound. The moment passes. Around you, the family network settles once more into layered breathing and occasional movement. Beyond the camp, darkness remains immense. Inside, warmth is created not only by flame bedding and hides, but by human proximity itself. I begin to understand that prehistoric nighttime security is not primarily an individual achievement. It is collective. You sleep because others listen. Children rest because adults gather around them. Older people carry memory. Younger people carry strength. Everyone carries something. And as the night deepens, these relationships will soon begin producing another form of warmth. Something less physical, but equally powerful. Stories are waiting in the darkness. Section 10. The camp has settled into a gentler rhythm, and the fire now burns low enough that faces appear and disappear between shadow and amber light. Someone begins speaking. At first the voice is quiet, almost casual, but several people nearby slowly turn their attention towards the speaker. A child who seemed half asleep opens both eyes again. You listen too. You cannot understand the language, of course, because no vocabulary from this particular community survives across 50,000 years, yet the rhythm feels unmistakably human. A pause, a gesture toward the valley. A few soft laughs follow. Whatever is being told, the listeners know something about it already. Perhaps the speaker is describing an event from earlier that day. Perhaps someone crossed a river, badly frightened a herd too soon, or returned carrying far less food than expected. Maybe the story is practical. Maybe it is ridiculous. Those categories have never been mutually exclusive. Human beings remember information more easily when it is arranged into meaningful sequences involving people, places, causes, and consequences. Stories can therefore carry knowledge without resembling formal instruction. A child does not need a lecture about dangerous cliffs. A memorable tale about someone slipping near one may work considerably better. The fire cracks softly. Smoke moves through the shelter, bringing the familiar smell of charred wood and warming hides. The speaker lifts one hand and imitates something moving through the grass. Several listeners recognize it immediately. There is another ripple of amusement. I begin to imagine how much information can travel this way. A story may contain geography. It can identify where water lies beyond a ridge, where animals gather during a certain season, or where stone suitable for tools can be found. It may preserve weather memory. Someone can remember that a valley flooded after unusual rain, or that snow lingered longer than expected in a particular year. It can contain social history. A tale may explain who helped whom, who failed badly, who proved trustworthy, or why another group should be approached cautiously. None of this requires writing. Humans live successfully for immense spans of time without written records, depending instead on memory repetition, demonstration, and spoken communication. Writing is extremely recent by comparison. For nearly all human existence, knowledge traveled through bodies and voices. That makes tonight important. What you are hearing may be one of the primary technologies of cultural survival. The stone point beside you can cut meat. The story can tell someone where to find it. Language allows experience to escape the limits of one individual life. A person can learn about danger without personally encountering it and learn routes never traveled before. This creates cumulative culture. Knowledge can be modified, corrected, remembered, and passed onward. By around 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were producing increasingly varied tools, ornaments, pigments, and symbolic objects across different regions. These patterns suggest sophisticated communication and shared cultural traditions. Most researchers consider complex spoken language highly likely by this period. Exactly how similar it was to modern language remains uncertain. Speech leaves almost no direct archaeological evidence. You can reconstruct bones and tools, but not grammar. Anatomy offers clues through vocal structures, hearing abilities, as brain organization and genes associated with speech. Yet none can tell researchers whether prehistoric people used particular sentence structures or told elaborate narratives exactly as you imagine tonight. Scholars continue debating when fully modern language emerged and whether it developed gradually or through important evolutionary shifts. The argument remains unresolved. Your companions are wonderfully indifferent to future academic disagreements. The speaker continues. Now another adult interrupts. There is a brief exchange followed by louder laughter from the group. Apparently prehistoric storytelling may also include fact-checking. That possibility feels reassuring. Or perhaps the interruption improves the story by making it even less accurate. Oral traditions are flexible. Stories can change as they move between people, especially when entertainment matters alongside information. This is sometimes treated as a weakness. It can also be a strength. A story that adapts to new listeners may survive longer than one preserved rigidly. Important details can be emphasized, confusing ones simplified, and memorable patterns strengthened over repeated retellings. Repetition becomes preservation. Children may hear the same story many times before fully understanding its meaning. They learn names. They anticipate turns. They recognize which moments are funny or frightening. Eventually, they become capable of telling it themselves. You can almost watch culture reproducing in real time. There is a quirky possibility worth considering. Some researchers have wondered whether certain very old oral traditions could preserve memories of environmental events for extraordinary periods, perhaps thousands of years. Claims of extremely ancient oral memory remain controversial because stories change, combine, and acquire new meanings over time. Still, the broader principle is reasonable. Important landscapes can accumulate narratives that help communities remember how to behave within them. A dangerous river becomes more than water. A mountain becomes more than stone. A migration route becomes part of shared identity. Tonight's speaker gestures toward the dark horizon again. No one can see much beyond the firelight. That may actually help. When the visible world shrinks, attention moves inward toward voice, expression, rhythm, and imagination. Logical studies of evening conversations in some hunter-gatherer communities suggest that nighttime talk can differ from daytime conversation. Practical discussion may give way more often to stories, social themes, ritual, and imaginative material. Again, such observations cannot be copied directly into deep prehistory. Modern communities are not prehistoric replicas, but darkness creates similar physical conditions. Work slows. People gather. The surrounding landscape becomes less visually demanding. The voice becomes central. You feel that shift now. During daylight, attention is pulled constantly toward the movement tools, food, terrain, and distant animals. At night, a speaker can hold several listeners without competing against an entire visible valley. Firelight assists theatrically. A face changes as flames move. Hands become silhouettes. A sudden gesture seems larger. Perhaps storytelling itself was shaped partly by these nighttime conditions. You cannot prove that. It remains an enticing possibility. The speaker lowers the voice. Listeners lean slightly closer. That trick apparently requires no electricity. Even a child who is nearly asleep becomes attentive. The story may now involve something dangerous because expressions have changed. The speaker imitates slow movement pauses and glances toward the darkness outside. Everyone waits. Then a sudden sound escapes the storyteller. Several children jump. Adults laugh immediately. Gentle cruelty has survived nicely. You can imagine this happening thousands of generations before anyone invents a stagebook, radio, or screen. Performance requires almost nothing. A voice is enough. A face helps. An audience completes it. Stories may also carry explanations for things people cannot fully understand. Why do stars move? Why does a particular animal behave strangely? Why do people dream of dead relatives? Why does thunder arrive from an empty sky? Humans naturally search for patterns and causes. Symbolic beliefs may have woven such questions into narratives long before formal religions appeared. Archaeology provides hints of symbolic thinking through burials, pigments, ornaments, cave art, and carefully treated objects. but belief is difficult to excavate. Historians and archaeologists cannot know what story surrounds an isolated bead or painted mark unless some interpretive tradition survives. The object remains, its explanation vanishes. You look toward the speaker again. Perhaps tonight's tale includes ancestors. Maybe an elder recalls someone who died years earlier and repeats that person's words. Memory can keep absent people socially present long after their bodies disappear. Children may know relatives they never met. A voice can bridge generations. This is another extraordinary property of storytelling. The dead can still teach, not literally, of course. Their experiences survive through the people who remember them. A warning from one generation becomes common knowledge in another. A successful hunting strategy becomes tradition. So does a joke. Not every inherited story needs to source. Some may simply make long nights enjoyable. That matters more than it sounds. Groups require emotional connection as well as practical cooperation. Shared laughter reduces tension, strengthens familiarity, and gives people reasons to remain together beyond immediate survival. The fire has grown lower again. One listener quietly adds a small piece of wood without interrupting the speaker. A new flame catches illuminating smoke as it curls upward. The story continues. Outside wolves may still be moving. The river keeps flowing. Cold settles over the valley. Yet the camp now contains another kind of shelter. Meaning. Through words, invisible landscapes become remembered. Absent people become present dangers, become lessons, and ordinary mistakes become entertainment. I begin to understand why spoken stories could matter so deeply before writing. They are not merely decorations added after survival. They help survival become shared. The speaker finally reaches an ending. There is a pause followed by several murmured reactions and one final laugh. A child asks something. Another story may be beginning, and while voices continue around, the dimming hearth hands nearby remain busy with stone, wood, hide, and the small repairs that darkness does not entirely stop. Section 11. The story fades into softer conversation and your attention gradually shifts toward another familiar human concern. Someone is hungry. Near the edge of the hearth, a small piece of meat has been warming above glowing coals. Fat begins to soften along its surface, releasing a rich smell that quickly travels through the shelter. Several sleepers notice. Food after sunset is not necessarily a grand evening meal arranged at one precise hour. In a mobile prehistoric camp, people may eat whenever gathered food, hunted animals, cooking time, and fatigue allow. Tonight, the hearth provides opportunity. A strip of roasted meat is lifted carefully from the heat and placed on a flat surface nearby. Steam rises briefly before disappearing into the colder air. You can smell smoke and animal fat. The scent is heavy, comforting, and difficult to ignore after a day of walking through cold terrain. Someone tears off a smaller piece and passes it toward a child. There are no plates, no polished cutlery waits nearby. Hands, stone tools, wooden implements, hides, bark leaves, or simple containers can accomplish most of what is needed. The meal is practical. By 50,000 years ago, humans were already highly flexible foragers capable of exploiting remarkably diverse foods. Meat could be important, particularly in colder environments, but prehistoric diets were never simply endless portions of roasted large animals. That stereotype survives remarkably well. The actual menu depends on place. In one region, people may hunt reindeer, horses, deer, wild cattle, or other large mammals. Elsewhere, they may rely more heavily on smaller animals, jellyfish, birds, eggs, fruits, seeds, nuts, roots, tubers, or edible green. Season changes everything. A food abundant for several weeks may vanish completely later in the year. Human survival therefore depends partly on remembering when particular resources become available. Tonight's camp reflects that flexibility. Beside the meat lies a small collection of plant foods gathered earlier, perhaps roots roasted near the coals or nuts cracked open with stone. Their smell is milder than the meat, slightly earthy and sweet. You take a bite. The texture is coarse. There is no salt shaker beside you. Although naturally occurring minerals and salty foods could provide familiar flavors in some environments. Food probably tastes simpler than much modern cooking, but simple does not mean unpleasant. Hunger improves the menu considerably. Cooking itself is ancient. Humans had been using heat to transform food long before 50,000 years ago, though archaeologists continue debating how consistently cooking was practiced in much earlier periods. By tonight's world-controlled fire makes cooking an ordinary possibility. Heating meat softens connective tissues and changes texture. It can also reduce some parasites and microorganisms, though your companions understand this through experience rather than microbiology. Cooked plant foods can change too. Roots become softer. Certain starches become easier to digest. Some tough foods become considerably more useful after roasting or prolonged heating. You notice how close experience sits beside experimentation. Someone places a root nearer the coals and waits until the outside darkens. Another person moves one farther away before it burns. Knowledge has accumulated through countless meals. A badly prepared plant might taste bitter. A properly heated one becomes edible. Children watch these decisions repeatedly until technique becomes ordinary. Food knowledge is cultural knowledge. You cannot determine whether a plant is safe simply because it looks friendly. Ancient gatherers would need detailed familiarity with local species, seasons, useful parts, dangerous, lookalikes, and preparation methods. Some foods may require soaking, pounding, roasting, or removing toxic portions before consumption. The landscape becomes a pantry only after people learn how to read it. That learning takes years. A child might begin gathering easy foods while older adults handle species requiring more judgment. Mistakes can be costly, so knowledge is likely reinforced through demonstration and repeated warnings. Prehistoric cuisine contains more expertise than stereotypes usually allow. There is even evidence from some ancient human sites that plant foods were processed with stone tools. Seeds, underground storage organs, and other plant resources can leave microscopic traces even when the food itself disappears. Such discoveries have complicated old images of Ice Age people surviving almost entirely on meat. Bones preserve beautifully. Salads do not. That archaeological bias matters. Animal remains are often easier to recognize than leaves, berries, roots, or soft plant tissues. As a result, prehistoric diets may sometimes look more carnivorous than they really were. Researchers continued debating the proportion of plant and animal foods consumed by different upper Paleolithic populations. Isotopes, dental remains, tools, residues, and animal bones provide clues, but none creates a complete menu. The answer varies greatly. You look toward the meat again. Someone uses a sharp stone flake to separate another piece from a joint. The cutting edge is remarkably effective, sharper in some respects than you expected. Stone tools are not crude simply because they are made of stone. A freshly struck flake can slice hide and flesh efficiently, though. The edge may be fragile and require replacement. This creates another evening task. Food preparation produces debris. Small bones accumulate near one area while usable fragments are separated. Fatty portions may receive the special attention because fat provides concentrated energy. In cold climates, this can become extremely important. Very lean meat alone is not an ideal long-term diet because human metabolism has limits on how much protein it can process efficiently. Fat and carbohydrates help provide balanced energy. Your companions do not discuss protein metabolism. They know that fatty tissues are valuable. Marrow can be especially desirable. Lung bones may be broken to reach the rich material inside, creating distinctive archaeological traces. The sound is surprisingly loud when stone strikes bone beside a quiet nighttime hearth. Crack! Everyone glances over briefly. Then eating resumes. The marrow has a dense oily texture and high caloric value. For people expending enormous energy through travel and physical work, such foods are useful resources rather than indulgences. A quirky possibility appears in the way food might be shared. Some anthropologists have proposed that distributing valuable meat helped strengthen alliances, reward cooperation, or support individuals who had poor luck that day. The exact social rules are impossible to reconstruct here. Who receives the best portion? Does the hunter claim priority? Do children eat first? Are older people given softer foods? Different groups may follow different customs. Archaeology rarely preserves etiquette. It can reveal which animals were butchered, where bones accumulated, and sometimes how carcasses were processed. It cannot easily tell you whether someone complained because their cousin received the larger piece. Yet sharing matters. Hunting large animals produces food in quantities that may exceed what one person or household can immediately consume. Distributing meat reduces waste and creates reciprocal relationships. Today you share. Tomorrow someone else succeeds. This pattern can stabilize life in environments where food availability fluctuates unpredictably. Gathered foods may circulate too. Urson returns with roots. Another brings nuts. Another contributes meat. The evening meal becomes a small map of the day's activities. Nothing is wasted casually. Tendons can become useful fibers. Hides can become coverings. Bones may become tools, ornaments, fuel, or raw material. Animal carcasses contain far more than food. This efficiency does not mean every scrap is always used. Humans can still abandon material when carrying it costs more energy than its value. Practicality governs decisions. You notice someone setting a partly eaten bone aside rather than finishing it immediately. Perhaps it will be cracked later. Perhaps a dog would love it, but dogs as you know them do not yet reliably belong beside this fire. The relationship between humans and wolves remains uncertain this far back, and scholars disagree over when domestication truly began. If curious wolves sometimes linger near human camps, food scraps could become part of that long future story. For tonight, the bone remains human property. The fire gives another low flare. Smoke rolls across the group and briefly overwhelms the smell of food. Someone coughs, shifts position, and continues chewing. The meal slows. Conversation becomes softer. After enough food, bodies that felt cold and restless begin relaxing again beneath hides. You feel warmth spreading through your stomach. The night outside remains dangerous, but hunger has temporarily retreated. That matters emotionally as well as physically. Eating together creates a pause between the demands of one day and the uncertainties of another. Hands pass food. Children receive smaller pieces. Someone offers a final roasted root across the hearth. You realize that prehistoric dinner is not defined by primitive ingredients. It is defined by knowledge. People must know what to gather, what to hunt, how to prepare it, when to share it, and how much to preserve for later. The remaining food is moved away from careless feet. A few bones remain near the working area. Someone wipes greasy fingers across a hide and reaches toward a stone tool waiting beside the fire. The meal is ending, but the evening's work is not. In the firelight, damaged points, wooden shafts, hides, and cutting edges still need attention before tomorrow begins. Section 12. The last scraps of food disappear, but the firelight continues to serve another purpose. Hands return to work. Beside the hearth, someone lifts a stone point and turns it slowly between finger and thumb. One edge has been damaged during the day, leaving a small irregular notch where the sharp line should continue smoothly. Tomorrow that matters. A hunting point, cutting, flake scraper, or wooden shaft does not remain useful forever, simply because someone made it well. Tools wear down, break loose and dull, and occasionally disappear at exactly the wrong moment. So the evening becomes repair time. You hear stone click softly against stone as a skilled worker begins removing tiny flakes from the damaged edge. Each controlled strike changes the shape by an amount so small that you almost miss it. The movements are precise. This is not random rock smashing. By 50,000 years ago, several human populations possessed sophisticated stoneworking traditions requiring planning practice and detailed knowledge of raw materials. Different regions used different techniques. Some craftspeople prepared stone cores carefully so that flakes of predictable shapes could be removed later. Other tools were retouched repeatedly, extending their usefulness before replacement became necessary. The stone in front of you has a glassy feel. Its surface is cold where your fingers touch it, though the side nearest the fire has already begun warming. When struck correctly, suitable materials such as flint or chert can fracture along predictable curved surfaces. That predictability makes skill possible. The worker studies the edge before striking again. A tiny flake jumps free. You hear it land somewhere in the dirt. Archaeologists love such fragments. Individual flakes may look insignificant, but patterns of waste material can reveal where people sat, what techniques they used, and sometimes how tools were produced or repaired. A prehistoric workshop can survive as scattered stone. The craftsperson, of course, disappears. You watch the hands rather than the object. Years of experience live inside those movements. The angle of impact matters. The force matters. The location of the strike matters. Too much force can ruin a nearly finished piece, while too little accomplishes nothing useful. Learning probably begins early. Children living within such communities would see tool-making constantly, not as a special demonstration, but as ordinary life happening within arm's reach. A young person may begin with poor quality stone. Mistakes are cheaper there. Perhaps an impatient child strikes too hard and breaks a promising flake in half. An older person takes the pieces, examines them, and shows where the blow should have landed. No classroom is required. The floor becomes covered with lessons. Archaeologists occasionally identify concentrations of poorly made artifacts that some researchers interpret as evidence of beginners practicing stoneworking. That interpretation is fascinating but uncertain. A crude object might represent a novice, an expedient tool made quickly, poor raw material, or simply a craftsperson having a thoroughly unimpressive afternoon. Ancient incompetence is difficult to diagnose. Still, skill must be learned somehow. Around the hearth, knowledge transfers through observation, correction, imitation, and repetition. Another person works on wood. A long shaft rests across both knees, while a stone edge scrapes along its surface. Thin curls peel away, releasing a faint dry smell beneath the stronger scent of smoke. Wood rarely survives from this period. That creates a distorted archaeological picture. Stone endures for tens of thousands of years, while wooden implements usually decay unless preserved under unusual conditions. Prehistoric technology therefore often appears more stone-centered than daily life truly was. Wooden tools were probably everywhere. Spears digging sticks, handles, containers, supports, pegs, frames and countless temporary objects could be made from branches or worked timber. Most simply vanished. The same problem affects fibers. Plant cords, sinew leather bindings, baskets, nets and woven materials can disappear almost completely while nearby stone tools survive. You are seeing a richer technological world than the archaeological record usually preserves. The wooden shaft beside you proves the point. Someone checks its straightness by holding it toward the glow. The shaft must fly or thrust predictably. A warped piece can be heated and adjusted carefully, though methods vary according to wood type and intended use. The fire helps. Heat can soften certain materials and make shaping easier. Resin or natural adhesives may also be warmed before use. Compound tools become possible when separate materials are combined. Stone may form the cutting element. Wood provides length or leverage. Sinew-hide strips, plant fibers or adhesives can hold components together. Such combinations require planning. You must understand how different materials behave before assembling them into one reliable object. A stone point alone is useful. A point securely attached to a shaft becomes something else entirely. Researchers have found evidence that prehistoric humans used hafted tools long before 50,000 years ago. By this period, composite technology was already part of several human traditions. Exactly which adhesives and binding methods were used in every population remains uncertain. Some evidence suggests prehistoric people understood remarkably complex natural glues, including birch tar in earlier Neanderthal contexts. Producing such substances may require controlled heating. That detail is wonderfully inconvenient for any stereotype portraying ancient humans as technically simple. Even prehistoric glue has academic arguments attached to it. You watch someone warming a dark, sticky material near the fire. Whether it is resin tar or another adhesive in this imagined camp cannot be known with certainty. The important point is that natural substances can help secure bindings and stabilize tool components. The smell becomes sharper as it warms. Someone moves it farther from the flame. Too much heat would ruin the material. Once again, prehistoric technology depends on controlled conditions rather than brute force. Across the hearth, another person handles animal hide. The surface makes a dry scraping sound as a stone tool passes over it. Preparing skins can involve removing tissue, stretching, drying, softening, smoking, and working the material repeatedly. The exact sequence depends on desired use. A stiff hide may be acceptable for one purpose. Clothing requires greater flexibility. Bedding has different demands. Containers need strength. The scraper follows a familiar rhythm. Pull, pause, turn, scrape again. The work is repetitive enough to accompany conversation. Perhaps this is why evenings become productive without feeling hurried. Hands continue routines while voices drift around the fire. Someone laughs quietly at a remark from the other side. Another person barely looks up. A bone object now appears in the glow. Its surface has been polished smooth from repeated handling, and one end carries a carefully worked point. Bone and antler expand technological possibilities. They can be shaped into awls, points, needles, decorative objects, and other specialized tools. Their widespread development becomes especially visible in later Upper Paleolithic contexts, though bone technologies existed earlier in various forms. Historians still argue over the timing and regional spread of some specialized organic technologies around this broad period. Preservation complicates everything. A site without bone tools may represent true absence, poor preservation, or archaeologists simply missing fragile fragments during earlier excavations. The past enjoys ambiguity. One particularly intriguing object is the eyed needle. Clearly recognizable bone needles become important later in the Upper Paleolithic and suggest tailored clothing rather than simple wrapped hides. Whether people in your exact 50,000-year-old camp possess true-eyed needles depends greatly on region and chronology. They may instead use awls, punches, sinew, and simpler fastening methods. Either way, clothing can be carefully fitted. That matters in severe cold. A loose hide protects differently from clothing shaped around limbs and torso. Better-fitting garments trap warmth and allow easier movement. Technology reaches directly into survival. You hear another stone strike. A spark appears briefly, though. Nobody seems interested because the blow was aimed at tool-making rather than fire production. A child picks up a discarded flake. An adult takes it away almost immediately. Fresh stone edges can be extremely sharp. Prehistoric childcare includes the timeless instruction not to touch dangerous objects, even if the vocabulary has vanished. The child looks offended. Some traditions truly are ancient. Nearby small pieces of pigment lie among other materials. Red ochre was used by prehistoric humans in many regions for purposes that may have included coloring objects, treating hides, body decoration, adhesive preparation, or symbolic activities. Its exact role can be difficult to interpret. A stained stone might belong to practical technology, personal decoration, ritual behavior, or several uses at once. Future archaeologists will debate it enthusiastically. Tonight, somebody simply grinds a little pigment against stone. The faint rasp joins the scraping hide, clicking, flakes, crackling wood, and quiet conversation. These sounds blend into one domestic workshop. Nothing here resembles a factory objet, yet production surrounds you. Tomorrow's success depends partly on tonight's maintenance. A repaired point may penetrate more effectively. A straightened shaft may fly better. A softened hide may keep someone warmer. A secure binding may prevent a tool from failing at the worst possible moment. Small improvements accumulate. That is how technology often advances. Not through one brilliant prehistoric inventor, standing dramatically on a hill, but through countless people adjusting methods across generations. Someone discovers a better angle. Someone chooses a stronger fiber. Someone notices that heating a material changes its behavior. Others imitate the result. Knowledge becomes tradition. Tradition becomes skill. You look at the ground surrounding the hearth. Stone flakes sparkle faintly in firelight. Wood shavings lie beside someone's feet. A length of cord disappears into shadow. To a future archaeologist, only part of this scene will survive. To you, the camp feels crowded with technology. The repair work gradually slows. Finished tools are placed where they can be found easily after sunrise. Dangerous edges are kept away from sleeping children. Hands become still. The fire lowers again. Yet one object remains visible in the shifting light, a polished surface catching orange reflections, then vanishing into darkness. The changing shadows begin making ordinary things look unfamiliar. And before sleep fully returns, you are about to discover how strangely the human mind responds when firelight starts moving across the night. Section 30. The last scraping sounds have stopped, but the fire continues moving across the shelter walls. Nothing around you is truly still. A branch collapses inward, exposing brighter coals beneath its blackened surface. The sudden flare sends a tall shadow sliding across the stone behind you. For an instant, it resembles a person. Then the flame settles and the figure disappears. Your mind understands what happened, yet your body reacts before that explanation arrives. Muscles tighten slightly and your eyes remain fixed on the empty wall. Firelight does this constantly. Its brightness changes from second to second, transforming familiar objects into uncertain shapes. A hanging hide becomes a dark body, while a wooden shaft briefly resembles a narrow animal standing upright. The effect is strongest at the edge of vision. Human peripheral visions especially sensitive to movement, which makes sense in environments where detecting motion can matter more than identifying fine detail. At night, however, that useful sensitivity can also create mistakes. Something seems to move. You turn. Nothing is there. The people around you have experienced this since childhood, so they probably react less dramatically than you do. Even so, ancient eyes and ancient brains are still human. Patterns invite interpretation. A crack in stone can resemble a face. 2 dark marks can become eyes. Smoke drifting across a wall can appear almost alive. This tendency to detect meaningful shapes in ambiguous information is common in modern humans. Psychologists call one form of it pareidolia, although nobody beside this prehistoric fire needs the term. They simply see things. Sometimes those things are real. Sometimes they are shadows. The difference can matter greatly after dark. You watch the shelter wall again. Orange light crawls across rough stone, disappearing into hollows and returning along raised surfaces. The wall seems deeper than it looked during daylight. Texture becomes landscape. A small ridge looks like an animal's back. A natural depression becomes an open mouth. Perhaps this is one reason caves and firelight later become such powerful settings for prehistoric art. Painted and engraved animals sometimes appear to interact with natural cracks, bulges and contours in stone. Artists could use the wall itself. A curved surface might suggest a shoulder. A fissure could become part of a leg. The rock helps complete the image. Some scholars have proposed that flickering lamps or firelight may have made cave images appear to shift or move. Several overlapping animal outlines might seem animated when illuminated from changing angles. The idea is fascinating. It is also difficult to prove. Researchers continue debating whether certain Paleolithic images were deliberately designed for movement effects, or whether modern observers are reading too much into overlapping forms. There is no prehistoric director's commentary. Still Tonight gives you a sense of how powerful moving light can be. The fire brightens again. A polished stone catches the glow and reflects it sharply toward you. For a brief moment, the flash seems brighter than everything around it. Your eyes adjust slowly afterward. The darkness beyond the hearth becomes even harder to read. This creates a strange contrast. Fire provides vision, but it also limits it. Within the illuminated circle, faces and tools become visible. Beyond that circle, the darkness feels deeper because your eyes remain partly adapted to the flame. A person standing several steps out might be nearly invisible. That is unsettling. The group therefore depends on hearing as much as sight. A faint rustle near the entrance causes one adult to look up. The sound stops immediately. No one moves. Perhaps wind shifted the grass. Perhaps a small animal passed out. The uncertainty remains. Firelight makes the silence feel theatrical, although nobody here is trying to create suspense. Then smoke changes direction. It rolls low across the shelter, carrying the bitter smell of charred wood and old ash. Your eyes sting, and tears briefly blur the fire into soft orange halos. Now the shadows become even stranger. A child notices one stretching across the wall and lifts a hand toward it. The shadow copies the movement. Another child immediately joins. For a few moments their fingers create enormous shapes against the stone. It is difficult not to imagine games. Children everywhere experiment with cause and effect, and moving shadows provide an irresistible demonstration. A small hand becomes a huge silhouette with very little effort. Perhaps someone discovers a bird shape. Perhaps someone makes something intentionally frightening. You can almost hear the laughter. There is no evidence that Paleolithic children played formal shadow games, of course. Such behavior would leave almost nothing archaeologically visible. Yet playful interaction with light requires little technology. It needs only fire hands and curiosity. That makes it plausible even if unknowable. The larger question concerns meaning. Did darkness and flickering light influence early religious ideas, storytelling, or beliefs about invisible beings? Historians cannot answer confidently. Human beings clearly displayed symbolic behavior by this broad period, using pigments, ornaments, burials, engraved objects, and other materials in ways that suggest complex social meanings. But symbolism does not reveal specific beliefs. Red pigment does not automatically mean ritual. A cave does not automatically mean sacred space. A strange shadow does not automatically become a spirit. Modern interpretations can become too eager. The safest conclusion is simpler. Night changes perception. Limited vision encourages imagination to work harder, while shifting light turns ordinary surroundings into uncertain forms. Those conditions create opportunities for fear, humor, story memory, and symbolism. You feel all five tonight. Another shadow crosses behind someone's shoulder. This time it comes from a person walking near the hearth. The movement is ordinary, yet the silhouette stretches nearly twice the person's height across the wall. Fire exaggerates bodies. A seated elder becomes enormous. A child can become monstrous. Someone holding a spear creates a long angular figure that seems to reach toward the ceiling. The effect may shape storytelling too. A speaker beside the fire can use gesture and shadow together, turning a simple tale into something larger than conversation. No carved stage is necessary. The shelter provides one automatically. There is another odd feature of night vision. When you stare directly at a faint object, it may seem to disappear, while looking slightly beside it can make it easier to notice. This happens because the retina's rod cells are distributed differently from the cone cells used for detailed central vision. Your prehistoric companions know the effect without knowing retinal anatomy. Experience teaches them how to look. A faint animal shape near the edge of camp may be easier to detect indirectly. Skilled night observers learn to trust subtle movement rather than sharp outlines. You try it yourself. Beyond the fire, a dark bush seems invisible when you stare straight toward it. When you shift your gaze slightly, its outline becomes easier to detect. That feels almost magical. It is biology. Still, biology often feels magical before anyone understands the mechanism. The stars outside remain steady while everything near the fire flickers. This difference makes the sky seem calm and the shelter strangely alive. You turn toward the entrance. The Milky Way stretches above the valley with astonishing clarity, but the foreground remains filled with restless shadow. Behind you, stone walls move without moving. Ahead, stars remain fixed without truly being fixed at all. Your senses sit between two kinds of illusion. The atmosphere becomes quieter. Most children have settled again. One adult adjusts a hide and lies down, leaving the wall almost empty except for firelight. You watch the shapes there soften. A dark ridge becomes nothing more than stone. Hanging hide becomes cloth again. Smoke rises. The mind releases its inventions, but not completely. Humans are pattern makers. We connect marks into faces, noises into causes, stars into shapes and events into stories. That ability can mislead us, but it also helps create art, memory planning, and shared meaning. Perhaps prehistoric darkness sharpened that tendency. Perhaps nights like this encouraged people to imagine what could exist beyond direct sight. No archaeologist can measure that thought, yet you can feel the conditions that make it possible. The fire lowers further. Shadows shrink. Your eyes begin drifting upwards toward the shelter entrance where the darkness opens into a sky so crowded with stars that it almost seems brighter than the earth below. And beyond this small camp, other humans sometimes choose to enter darkness, deliberately carrying light into places where daylight never reaches. Section 14. The thought of entering darkness deliberately changes the meaning of the night almost at once. Outside darkness happens to you. Inside a cave you choose it. Imjin, leaving the familiar glow of the camp and following several companions toward a limestone opening in the hillside. The entrance appears black against the faintly silver landscape, swallowing moonlight only a few steps beyond its mouth. Cool air meets your fave. The smell changes immediately from grass smoke and human bodies to damp stone, mineral dust, and old earth. Every sound becomes sharper once the open valley disappears behind you. Someone carries a small flame. It may come from a torch, a burning branch, or a simple lamp using animal fat and a fibrous wick. Such portable light allows humans to move into spaces where daylight never reaches. That alone is remarkable. Deep caves are inconvenient places. They are cold, uneven, confusing, and sometimes dangerous. Water drips from ceilings, passages, narrow unexpectedly, and loose stone can shift beneath your feet. Yet prehistoric people entered them. Across later Paleolithic Europe, humans created extraordinary paintings, engravings, handmarks, signs, and animal images inside caves, sometimes far beyond the reach of natural light. Some very early cave art elsewhere may be tens of thousands of years older than many famous European examples. By around this broad period, symbolic behavior is already well established among Homo sapiens. Exactly what is happening tonight remains uncertain. Perhaps no image exists in this particular cave. Perhaps someone is entering only to gather mineral pigment shelter, temporarily explore passages, or visit a place already considered meaningful. You follow anyway. The small flame bends as air moves through the passage. Its light reaches only a few steps ahead, making the darkness beyond seem almost solid. Your hand touches the wall. The limestone feels cool and slightly damp, with shallow ridges running beneath your fingers. Tiny droplets catch the light before disappearing when the flame moves. Behind you, the entrance has vanished. Now there is no sky. Only stone surrounds you. This is a different kind of night. At camp, darkness stretches outward without walls. Here, darkness presses close from every direction, interrupted only by one moving circle of warm light. The person carrying the flame knows the route. That matters enormously. A cave can divide into passages that look nearly identical to an unfamiliar visitor. Without memory marks or repeated experience, finding the entrance again could become difficult. You step carefully. The floor slopes downward. Pebbles click beneath your feet and the sound travels farther than expected. Somewhere ahead, water falls at regular intervals. Drop. Silence. Drop again. The rhythm feels almost deliberate. Cave acoustics can be strange. Some chambers magnify voices, while others swallow them. A clap can return as multiple echoes, creating the impression of movement from directions where nobody stands. Prehistoric visitors surely noticed this. Whether they assigned special meaning to particular echoes remains an open question. Some researchers have suggested that sound properties may have influenced where images were placed inside certain caves. The proposal is intriguing but difficult to demonstrate consistently. A resonant chamber may have been meaningful. It may also have contained excellent walls. Future scholars must live with both possibilities. The passage widens. Someone raises the lamp. Across the wall lines appear. At first you think they are natural cracks. Then one curve connects to another. A back, a shoulder, a head. An animal emerges from the stone. The image does not resemble a modern framed painting. Its shape follows the wall, using the natural surface as part of the composition. A ridge gives volume to the body. A crack resembles a leg. Pigment strengthens what the rock already suggests. You move closer. The color is dark red in one area and nearly black in another. Perhaps made with ochre, charcoal, manganese, rich minerals, or other substances available locally. Pigments could be ground, mixed, rubbed, blown, painted, or applied with simple tools. Different methods leave different traces. The sophistication lies not only in drawing. It begins with materials. Someone must locate pigment sources, collect them, transport them, prepare them, and understand how they behave on stone. Light must also be managed. The artist cannot simply switch on a brighter lamp when details become difficult. Portable lamps found at Paleolithic sites show that animal fat could support small flames, sometimes using plant fibers as wicks. Experiments suggest such lamps can burn steadily enough to illuminate confined spaces. Torches provide stronger light but create more smoke. Each option changes the experience. A smoky torch flickers dramatically. A small fat lamp may offer softer, steadier illumination. Begin noticing black marks on the ceiling. Some could come from ancient flame. In real cave soot deposits and charcoal traces can sometimes help researchers understand how people move through dark chambers. Prehistoric lighting leaves its own archaeology. That detail is wonderfully practical. Humanity's earliest great art galleries may have required someone to worry about fuel. A masterpiece is difficult to appreciate when the lamp dies halfway through the passage. The flame beside you drops briefly. Someone adjusts the wick. Light returns. The animal on the wall seems to move. Its head appears different when illuminated from below, while the legs fade when the flame shifts sideways. This changing visibility may have been intentional in some places. Researchers continue arguing over whether overlapping outlines and carefully chosen wall contours were designed to create movement under flickering light. The possibility is captivating. Certainty is not. You should resist imagining every cave image as prehistoric cinema. Still moving illumination undeniably changes how static lines appear. The effects around you. A painted animal disappears partly into darkness, then returns as the lamp approaches. Natural bulges alter shadows across its body. For several seconds, the stone seems alive. A child would notice. So would an adult. You hear a whisper behind you. Voices are naturally lowered here, perhaps because the enclosed space makes every sound seem more important. Maybe this chamber has social rules. Perhaps only certain people enter. Perhaps everyone does. Perhaps images are created during ceremonies, teaching, storytelling, initiation, or ordinary exploration. No surviving explanation tells you. This uncertainty surrounds cave art almost as densely as darkness surrounds the walls. There is another intriguing detail. Not every prehistoric cave image depicts animals people commonly ate. Some famous painted species were hunted less frequently than others, suggesting art was not simply an illustrated menu. Horses, bison, lions, rhinoceroses, mammoths, deer, and other creatures appear with different frequencies depending on region and period. Human figures are often rarer and more stylized. Why? Nobody knows with confidence. The animals may carry symbolic meaning. They may belong to stories. They may represent memorable encounters, social identities, teaching traditions, or something completely outside modern categories. Historians still debate what prehistoric artists intended, and no single explanation fits every cave. That uncertainty is part of the fascination. You see another mark, a hand shape. Perhaps pigment was blown around a hand pressed against stone, leaving a negative stencil once the fingers were removed. Such hand images appear in multiple prehistoric contexts. They feel intensely personal. An animal image may invite interpretation. A hand immediately reminds you of a body. Someone stood here. Someone spread fingers against this wall. Someone breathed pigment through a tube or directly from the mouth. Then the hand moved away. The outline remained. It's difficult not to feel close to that person. Yet even hand stencils contain mysteries. Researchers have tried estimating age, sex, and identity from finger proportions, but such methods remain controversial and uncertain. A small hand might belong to a child, or simply a small adult. Again, the stone refuses to explain here. Explain. You continue deeper. The air becomes cooler. A narrow passage forces everyone to crouch, and your shoulder brushes damp rock. There is no practical comfort here. That may be important. People are spending effort to reach this place. Effort often suggests value. It does not prove ritual, but it tells you the destination mattered enough to justify darkness, fuel risk, and time. The camp outside suddenly feels very far away. No predator call reaches you here. No wind moves through grass. Grass. Instead, you hear breathing, dripping water, faint footsteps, and the tiny crackle of the portable flame. The cave creates another social world. Its darkness is not something humans merely endure. They enter it. They illuminate selected surfaces. They leave marks behind. They return. Perhaps this is one of the quiet transformations that makes prehistoric nights so interesting. Darkness begins as limitation. Then humans turn it into space, a place for memory, a place for images, perhaps a place for meanings that daylight does not provide. Eventually the group turns back. The flame leads you toward the entrance, and after several bends, a faint grey-blue opening appears ahead. Night sky returns. It looks enormous. You step outside carrying the smell of stone and smoke with you. Above, the valley stars stretch from horizon to horizon. After the enclosed darkness of the cave, they seem almost impossibly bright. And now, with your eyes lifted upward, another ancient world begins to reveal itself. Section 15. The cave entrance falls behind you, and suddenly the sky feels larger than the entire valley. You stop walking. Above you, darkness is crowded with light. Thousands of stars appear where a modern city sky might show only a few dozen. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a pale, uneven river poured across the heavens. There are no street lamps, no glowing towns sit beyond the hills, no headlights cut across the landscape. The night sky belongs almost entirely to stars, moonlight, fire, and whatever faint glow the atmosphere provides. You understand immediately why people would notice it. A sky this bright is difficult to ignore. Even children growing up beneath it would learn recurring patterns simply through repetition. Certain stars appear in familiar positions. Some constellations rise during particular seasons, and the moon changes shape according to a cycle visible to anyone who watches. Night becomes a calendar of sorts. Not a precise written calendar, of course, but patterns in the heavens can help people recognize seasonal change, anticipate environmental shifts, and orient themselves across familiar landscapes. By 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were already highly mobile and capable of moving across large territories. Navigation would depend heavily on remembered landmarks, rivers, coastlines, valleys, mountain profiles, animal trails, and accumulated geographic knowledge. The sky may have helped too. Exactly how much remains uncertain. There is no surviving star chart scratched clearly into stone from this period saying quite helpfully, turn left beneath that constellation. Prehistory is rarely so considerate. Still, celestial navigation is biologically and culturally plausible. You walk farther from the camp. The fire behind you becomes a small orange point, and your eyes slowly adjust to the darker landscape. The stars appear sharper now. One particularly bright point hangs low above the horizon. You wonder whether your companions recognize it as a seasonal visitor or simply as something familiar that returns again and again. People do not need astronomy textbooks to notice recurrence. If a bright star rises in a particular part of the sky near the time certain animals migrate, that association can become useful. If the moon is full, travel after sunset becomes easier. If it is absent, moving through unfamiliar terrain becomes more difficult. Practical astronomy may begin with nothing more complicated than paying attention. The moon deserves special notice. On bright nights, it can illuminate open landscapes strongly enough to reveal paths, animal movement, and distant terrain. The difference between full moon and new moon can radically change nighttime activity. A group may choose to travel farther under brighter conditions. Hunters might observe animals behaving differently. Children may simply enjoy being allowed to stay awake longer. A prehistoric bedtime schedule probably had opinions about moonlight. You look upward again. The moon is only a narrow curve tonight, leaving most of the valley dependent on starlight. Its shape would not surprise the people beside you. They have watched it grow and shrink repeatedly since childhood. Its cycle is roughly a month-long, regular enough to become one of nature's most obvious repeating patterns. Some researchers have proposed that prehistoric notches carved into bone or stone may record lunar cycles. Such interpretations are controversial. Lines can be decorative, practical, symbolic, accidental, or counted for reasons unrelated to the moon. Scholars still debate whether certain Upper Paleolithic markings represent genuine lunar notation or whether modern observers are imposing astronomical meaning on simple patterns. The temptation is understandable. Humans love discovering calendars. Sometimes a row of scratches is only a row of scratches, but sometimes it may not be. That uncertainty follows you through much of prehistoric symbolism. You lie back briefly on a patch of dry ground and let the entire sky fill your vision. The sensation is almost dizzying. Without buildings or trees blocking much of the horizon, stars seem to curve around you rather than sit above you. The atmosphere feels cold against your cheeks. Grass brushes the back of your hand. Somewhere downhill the river continues murmuring over stones. The camp smells faintly of smoke from this distance. Then a streak of light crosses the sky. It appears suddenly and disappears before you can point. A meteor! Someone beside you reacts with a short sound of surprise. Been familiar events, though their unpredictability might make them especially memorable. What did people think they were? You cannot know. A falling star might be considered an omen, a spirit, a fire in the sky, or simply a strange natural event without elaborate explanation. Modern categories are dangerous here. Not every unexplained thing must become religion. Sometimes people can simply be curious. Still, unusual celestial events possess enormous storytelling potential. An especially bright meteor could be remembered for years. A lunar eclipse would be far more dramatic. Imagine watching the moon darken slowly without knowing the mechanics of Earth's shadow. The familiar object changes color. Its brightness fades. The night becomes different. Such events might inspire fear, fascination, ceremony, or storytelling. No evidence tells you exactly which. Solar eclipses would be even more astonishing, though much rarer at any given location. For a few minutes, daylight itself could weaken. Animals might behave strangely. Temperature might drop. Humans would notice. Whether memories of such events survived in oral tradition for generations is impossible to establish for this period. But unforgettable things tend to become stories. You turn toward the north. One region of sky appears to rotate around an apparently stable point over the course of the night. Today, Northern travelers recognize Polaris as useful for orientation, but 50,000 years ago, Earth's axial precession means the celestial pole was located elsewhere. This is a quirky detail of deep time. The sky itself changes slowly. Constellations do not keep exactly the same positions forever because stars move while Earth's axis gradually shifts its orientation over thousands of years. Your prehistoric companions therefore see a subtly different sky from the one above you today. Not dramatically alien, but different enough that some familiar navigational references would not match. The stars are ancient, the patterns are temporary. That thought feels strangely calming. Even the heavens change only much more slowly than human lives. You imagine generations watching similar skies. A child learns a group of stars from an elder. Years later, that child becomes the teacher. The names may survive. Stories may change. Useful associations endure. This is how knowledge lives without books. Perhaps one pattern resembles an animal important to the group. Perhaps another marks the season when a particular plant becomes ready to gather. Maybe several bright stars become characters in a story told only during winter. You cannot recover those constellations. Modern star patterns belong to later cultures and cannot simply be projected backward. The people here may divide the sky differently. Where you see one constellation, they may see three. Where you see an animal, they may see a journey. The lines between stars exist only in the human mind. That makes constellations a perfect example of culture-shaping perception. The stars remain where they are. Humans decide what connects them. A child beside you points upward. An adult responds quietly, tracing something across the sky with one finger. You cannot understand the words, yet the gesture tells you enough. Knowledge is being passed. Perhaps the adult is naming a star, perhaps explaining direction, perhaps telling a story. All three could happen at once. The distinction between practical and symbolic knowledge may be less rigid than modern categories suggest. A star can guide travel and belong to a myth. A moon phase can mark time and carry emotion. A bright planet can be both useful and beautiful. Humans rarely separate meaning into tidy academic boxes. The air grows colder. Your breath becomes faintly visible when you turn toward the fire. Several people have already returned to the bedding. The sky remains magnificent, but tired bodies eventually demand attention. You stay a moment longer. There is another small movement overhead. Our satellite. No! Nothing artificial crosses this sky. That absence makes the heavens feel astonishingly stable. Every light you see belongs to nature. Stars, planets, meteors, perhaps the faint glow of distant aurora in certain regions. No blinking aircraft interrupts the view. No city glow washes out the horizon. For a modern visitor, the sky seems almost excessive. For your companions, it is simply night. That familiarity may be the most beautiful part. They do not need to travel somewhere special to see the Milky Way. It waits above them every clear evening. The universe is ordinary. The universe is ordinary. You reason begin walking back toward the camp. The fire grows brighter with every step. Behind you, the stars continue their slow movement across the sky, unnoticed by sleepers and watched by whoever remains awake. Soon, however, beauty will compete with something much less poetic. The temperature is still falling. In colder regions, a clear night like this can turn breathtakingly severe before dawn. And beneath those brilliant stars, the Ice Age is waiting. Section 16. By the time you return to the sleeping area, the cold has become impossible to ignore. The fire is still alive, but its warmth now feels smaller. Beyond the hearth, frost begins forming across exposed grasses, catching faint starlight along their edges. Your breath appears as pale vapor whenever you turn away from the flames. This is Ice Age Europe. The name can sound misleadingly simple, as though the entire continent remained buried beneath permanent snow. In reality, conditions varied enormously by region, season, and century. But many nights were bitter. Around 50,000 years ago, Europe lay within the long climatic instability of the last glacial period. Vast ice sheets covered northern regions, while colder steppe tundra, woodland, and mixed environments spread across large areas farther south. Temperatures could change dramatically across generations. For the people living here, however, climate is not an abstract graph. It touches skin. You crouch beside the hearth and extend both hands toward the coals. Heat reaches your palms immediately while the backs of your hands remain exposed to freezing air. The contrast feels almost painful. Someone adds heavier fuel. Flames return, gradually illuminating faces wrapped more tightly in hides. A sleeping child has disappeared almost completely beneath a covering, leaving only a small patch of dark hair visible. Warmth must be protected. Human bodies lose heat continuously, especially when wind removes the thin layer of warmed air near the skin. Proper clothing, therefore, becomes one of the most important technologies in cold environments. Animal hides offer obvious protection, yet simply throwing a skin over your shoulders is not enough during severe conditions. Clothing works better when shaped around the body, layered, secured and designed to reduce openings where warm air escapes. How sophisticated garments were by exactly 50,000 years ago remains debated. Needles with clear eyes become especially visible later in the Upper Paleolithic record, but earlier people could still pierce hides with awls and fasten pieces using sinew leather strips or plant fibers. The absence of a needle does not mean nudity. You touch the hide covering your shoulders. Its outer surface feels coarse and cool. The inner surface traps warmth surprisingly well, especially when another layer sits underneath. Fur left attached to some skins can provide additional insulation. Footwear matters too. Bare feet on frozen ground quickly become a serious problem. Soft leather footwear stuffed with dry grass or other insulating material is one plausible solution, though. Organic evidence rarely survives from periods this ancient. Archaeologists therefore work partly from indirect clues. Wear patterns, tools, environmental conditions, and later preserved clothing help suggest what people may have needed. No complete wardrobe waits conveniently beneath the sediment. Still, human expansion into cold Eurasian environments strongly implies effective strategies for staying warm. Clothing is only one part. Shelter changes everything. A rock overhang blocks the strongest wind tonight, reducing heat loss before anyone adds another hide. In more exposed areas, humans could construct shelters using wood branches, hides, bone vegetation, or combinations of available materials. Some spectacular mammoth bone structures are known from later Ice Age sites in Eastern Europe. They are much younger than tonight's camp. Still, they demonstrate how far humans eventually pushed shelter construction where timber could be scarce. The quirky image is difficult to resist. Imagine returning from a successful mammoth hunt and eventually living beside walls containing enormous bones from animals larger than your room. But such structures should not be projected casually backward into every earlier camp. At 50,000 years ago, shelter forms remain far more difficult to identify. Temporary structures leave subtle traces. A few post holes, disturbed stone's hearth placement, or unusual artifact patterns may be all that survives. Researchers disagree over how often substantial built shelters were used during this broad period compared with natural rock shelters and lighter temporary constructions. Mobility probably shaped the answer. Why build heavily if you expect to leave soon? Why sleep completely exposed if wind is severe? The solution changes with need. Tonight the wind strengthens. It moves first through the grass outside, producing a dry whisper across the slope. Then a colder stream enters the shelter and crawls beneath your hide. You immediately pull it tighter. Someone near the entrance shifts a screen of branches or hide to block part of the draft. The improvement is obvious. No complex architecture is required. Even a simple windbreak can transform comfort. The fire burns unevenly now. Wind feeds one side, with additional oxygen making flames brighten before collapsing again. Sparks rise toward the shelter, opening and disappear into darkness. Fuel consumption increases. Cold nights are expensive in wood. That creates a difficult equation. The group needs enough fire to maintain warmth, cook, and provide light. Yet every extra branch burned now must be replaced through future gathering. In treeless landscapes, fuel becomes harder to obtain. Low shrubs can help. So can driftwood near rivers. Dry animal dung may burn under suitable circumstances, and bones rich in fat can contribute to hearths where woody fuel is limited. Burning bone sounds unusual. Archaeologists have identified burned bone in numerous Paleolithic hearth contexts, although interpretation varies because bones can enter fires accidentally during cooking or disposal. Some deposits suggest deliberate fuel use, others do not. This remains one of those prehistoric details where an ordinary campfire becomes unexpectedly complicated. You watch a fragment at the hearth edge darken slowly. Perhaps it is fuel, perhaps yesterday's dinner simply ended badly for the bone. Either way, warmth continues. Cold also shapes food requirements. Maintaining body temperature consumes energy, especially during sustained exposure. People living in demanding northern environments need sufficient calories while also walking, hunting, carrying, processing hides, and performing other physical work. Fat becomes especially valuable. A lean animal may provide plenty of protein but insufficient energy if consumed without richer foods. Experienced hunters therefore pay attention not only to species but to season and condition. Animals themselves change through the year. Fat reserves rise and fall. Migration shifts availability. Winter landscapes demand planning. You look toward the dark valley. Large herbivores such as reindeer horses, bison and mammoths once occupied different parts of Pleistocene Europe. Their movements shaped human opportunities as well as risks. Following animals can provide food. It can also pull people through difficult weather. Humans must know when movement is worthwhile. A hunting group returning late during falling temperatures faces dangers that do not exist at midday. Cold makes mistakes more expensive. Wet clothing becomes dangerous. An injury becomes harder to manage. Losing direction consumes precious time. So the clear stars you admired earlier may also have practical value when traveling. Beauty and survival overlap again. You hear someone coughing near the bedding. Cold, dry air irritates the throat. Smoke adds another burden. Shelters must therefore balance warmth against ventilation, especially when fire burns close to sleeping people. Too much opening loses heat. Too little air traps smoke. There is no perfect arrangement. Prehistoric comfort is compromise. You shift closer to the sleeper. Shared body heat helps immediately. Several people now lie beneath overlapping hides, reducing exposed surfaces. Children occupy warmer central positions while adults form a loose protective arrangement around them. The exact social pattern remains unknowable, but physics is cooperative. Two warm bodies together lose heat differently from two isolated bodies surrounded entirely by cold air. The effect becomes especially useful when bedding insulates everyone from the frozen ground. Earlier grass layers suddenly seem far more important. You press your palm beneath the hide. The bedding is compressed but still dry. That small pocket of trapped air beneath your body may save considerable heat over several hours. Nothing here is accidental anymore. Clothing, wind protection, fire, fuel, bedding, food, shared warmth. Each layer solves only part of the problem. Together they make sleep possible. I begin to appreciate how misleading the word survival can be. It often suggests one dramatic victory over nature. Real survival is usually repetitive. Collect fuel before sunset. Keep hides dry. Repair clothing. Choose shelter carefully. Eat enough. Notice the weather. Wake when the fire drops. Then do everything again tomorrow. No single action feels legendary. Combined across months and years, they allow human communities to occupy landscapes that seem astonishingly hostile. The wind suddenly falls. Silence settles over the shelter. Without moving air, the cold feels less aggressive, although frost continues spreading outside. The stars remain brilliant overhead. You hear the slow breathing of people wrapped beneath hides, the quiet pop of heated wood and occasional distant cracking from frozen ground or vegetation. It is an austere soundscape, yet it is also calm. The group has done this before. Many times, that familiarity is perhaps the most important protection of all. Cold becomes dangerous when underestimated, but experienced people rarely treat winter casually. Knowledge turns hardship into routine. You pull the hide higher and close your eyes. Heat gathers slowly around your chest. The night does not become warm, it becomes tolerable. And somewhere between the cold air, the glowing embers, and the heavy rhythm of breathing around you, consciousness begins drifting toward another mysterious landscape. The body remains in the Ice Age. The mind is about to dream. Section 17. The cold remains as outside your hide, but consciousness is beginning to loosen its grip on the camp. Your breathing slows. The crackle of the hearth becomes less distinct, blending with the wind, distant water, and the soft movements of sleeping bodies around you. Then the valley begins to change. Perhaps you are still beside the fire. Perhaps you are already somewhere else. A familiar ridge appears beneath brighter daylight, although you do not remember standing up or walking toward it. Someone who was sleeping beside you now waits far ahead. Dreaming has begun. People 50,000 years ago almost certainly dreamed, because dreaming is deeply connected with normal human sleep. Modern humans experience vivid dreams, especially during rapid eye movement sleep, although dreams can also occur during other sleep stages. Your prehistoric brain shares the same basic architecture. It requires rest. It cycles through changing states. It stores memories, processes emotions, and sometimes creates experiences that feel remarkably convincing while they happen. The dream does not announce itself. You simply find yourself inside it. A herd moves across the valley below, far larger than anything you saw during the previous day. Dust rises behind dozens of animals while sunlight flashes across their backs. Then one animal turns. Its face is wrong. Perhaps it resembles someone you know. Dream logic accepts this without protest. The sleeping mind combines recent experiences, older memories, fears, desires, and fragments that would never fit together while you are awake. Modern neuroscience can observe some mechanisms behind dreaming. It cannot recover what a Paleolithic person dreamed on one particular winter night. That part is gone forever. No fossil preserves an image seen during sleep. No hearth records a nightmare. No cave wall can be confidently labelled as yesterday's dream. Researchers therefore approach prehistoric dreaming indirectly. If ancient Homo sapiens possessed brains and sleep cycles broadly comparable with ours, then dreaming was almost certainly part of ordinary life. What those dreams meant culturally is far less certain. Did people treat dreams as meaningless mental noise? Probably not always. Did they believe dreams carried messages, warnings, memories, or encounters with invisible beings? Possibly. Yet historians cannot safely project later spiritual traditions backward across 50,000 years. That temptation is powerful. A strange dream seems ready-made for supernatural interpretation, but people can respond to dreams in many ways. Some laugh, some worry, some forget them before breakfast, some tell everyone immediately. You may have met all four types. Your sleeping companions probably included similar variation. A child begins murmuring somewhere nearby. The sound enters your dream. Now the distant herd seems to make human voices. This is another familiar property of sleeping minds. Real sensations can become incorporated into dreams rather than waking you immediately. A noise outside may transform into something inside the dream. Cold air can become snow. Pressure from bedding can become a heavy object. Smoke may become fog. The boundary between environment and imagination becomes porous. That could matter greatly in prehistoric camps. A wolf howls in the distance, perhaps a sleeper dreams of being followed. The fire collapses with a sharp crack. Perhaps another dream suddenly changes direction. Someone nearby coughs. A familiar voice may appear inside another person's sleeping mind without waking them fully. Night continues influencing people even when their eyes are closed. Dreaming may also participate in memory processing. Modern sleep research shows that sleep supports learning and memory consolidation, helping the brain strengthen and reorganize information gathered while awake. For prehistoric humans, this would matter enormously. Daily life contains vast amounts of practical information: routes, animal tracks, plant locations, social interactions, tool-making sequences, weather changes, warnings from elders. The sleeping brain helps organize experience rather than simply switching off until dawn. You do not dream a neat instructional lesson. Instead, memory appears in fragments. You see the stoneworker from earlier, but now she stands beside a river that belongs somewhere else. Her hands strike flint and every flake becomes a bright bird. A ridiculous image. The brain does not care. Dreams can be bizarre because normal waking constraints become loosened during sleep. Emotional significance often remains stronger than logical structure. Fear can feel enormous. So can relief. This makes nightmares especially interesting. Prehistoric people lived with genuine dangers that modern sleepers rarely face directly. Predators, injury, hunger. Severe weather conflict and losing contact with the group could all provide material for frightening dreams. A nightmare about pursuit would not require imagination from nothing. The raw ingredients existed outside the bedding. You are running now. The valley is dark again. Something follows behind you, but every time you turn there is nothing visible between the rocks. Your feet feel heavy. You try to call someone. No sound comes. Then your eyes open. The hearth glows quietly. No body is chasing you. Your heart is beating faster. For several seconds, waking reality feels less convincing than the dream you just left. That sensation may be ancient too. The person beside you remains asleep. You smell ash, hide, cold grass, and faint smoke. The familiar scents help anchor you. A hand touches the bedding. It is real. The dream begins fading almost immediately. You could still describe it now. In a few minutes, pieces may disappear. That raises another intriguing possibility. Dreams told around morning fires could become stories. A vivid dream involving an animal. A dead relative or an unfamiliar landscape might be shared with companions after waking. How would they react? We cannot know. One group might treat it seriously. Another might tease the dreamer without mercy. Possibly both. Dream interpretation is widespread across many later cultures, but that does not prove identical practices existed in the Upper Paleolithic. Scholars remain divided over how far ancient symbolic thought can be reconstructed from modern human tendencies. The safest claim is modest. People dreamed. People could remember some dreams. People could talk about them. Everything beyond that requires caution. Yet even this modest possibility is fascinating. Dreams create private experiences. Storytelling makes them social. A person can wake with an image nobody else saw and then place that image into the minds of listeners through language. That is a remarkable human ability. An invisible experience becomes shared. Perhaps unusual dreams influenced artistic choices. Perhaps not. Researchers sometimes speculate that altered states visions, trance, and dreams contributed to prehistoric imagery, especially unusual geometric forms or composite creatures. Such interpretations remain controversial. A painted figure combining human and animal characteristics might reflect mythology. ritual imagination storytelling, or something entirely different. Dreams offer one possibility among many. The evidence refuses certainty. You turn onto your side. The cold has deepened again, but shared warmth beneath the hides keeps your body comfortable enough. Sleep returns gradually. This time no chase begins. Instead, you find yourself walking beside someone who should not be here. Perhaps it is an elder who died seasons ago, the person who speaks normally. You accept their presence without surprise. Dreams can restore absent people with astonishing emotional force. Modern humans often dream about deceased relatives and companions, sometimes years after loss. There is no reason to think ancient emotional memory was fundamentally weaker. Such dreams could have been deeply moving. A person may awaken feeling comforted. Another may feel disturbed. Someone might interpret the encounter as memory. Someone else might believe it was real in another sense. The cultural meaning remains unknowable. The emotional power does not. I begin to understand how dreams could blur boundaries between past and present. People who are gone can speak again. Places far away return. Danger repeats without consequences. Desires become temporarily possible. The sleeping mind rearranges the world. A quirky detail appears when you consider that dream content can sometimes include bodily needs. A sleeper who is cold may dream of snow. Someone who needs water may dream about rivers. A person urgently needing to relieve themselves may receive extremely unhelpful dream suggestions involving streams. That problem is probably older than agriculture. Human biology carries little respect for historical dignity. The camp sleeps on. One person shifts. Another whispers something unintelligible. The firekeeper opens his eyes, glances towards the coals and closes them again. Around you, perhaps several invisible worlds are unfolding at once. One sleeper dreams of hunting. Another dreams of family. A child dreams of an animal seen earlier. Someone remembers nothing at all. No two inner nights are identical. That may be the strangest feature of sleeping together. Bodies lie only inches apart while minds travel through completely separate landscapes. The same hearth warms them. The same wind moves outside. The same star us cross the sky. Yet each dream belongs to one brain alone until morning words give it form. You sink deeper into the bedding. The boundary between waking and dreaming softens again. Sounds stretch. Time loses shape. The fire becomes sunrise, then disappears. Soon, however, something from the real camp will interrupt that private world. A cough, a crying child, a shifting ember, perhaps a noise beyond the shelter. Prehistoric sleep is rarely guaranteed to remain peaceful until dawn, and before the night is finished, someone will wake suddenly. Section D. A sharp sound pulls you out of sleep before you understand what caused it. Your eyes open into darkness. For several seconds, the dream you are having still clings to the edges of thought, while the real camp feels strangely unfamiliar. The fire has fallen to a deep red glow, and most faces have disappeared beneath hides. Then you hear it again. A child coughs nearby. The sound is dry and brief, followed by a restless movement beneath the bedding. An adult wakes almost immediately and reaches toward the child without fully sitting upright. No predator has entered camp. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet this small disturbance reveals something important about prehistoric sleep. Nights were probably fragmented. People woke because of children, cold smoke, weather, discomfort, bodily needs, weakening fires, strange sounds, dreams, and the ordinary rhythms of human sleep. Perfect uninterrupted rest may have been uncommon. That does not necessarily mean ancient people were constantly exhausted. Human sleep can be flexible, and brief awakenings are a normal part of healthy sleeping patterns. Modern sleepers often forget many of them. You may wake shift position, pull a covering higher, and return to sleep without remembering the event in the morning. Your prehistoric companions probably experienced something similar. The coughing child settles again. The adult beside them remains awake for another minute, listening to breathing before lying back down. Then wind changes outside. You hear it approaching through the valley before it reaches camp, moving through grass like a distant wave. The shelter entrance suddenly fills with colder air. Several sleepers react almost together. Someone pulls a hide tighter. Another rolls closer to the fire. A person near the entrance reaches out and adjusts the windbreak that was positioned earlier. Nobody needs a meeting. Habit handles the problem. This is where camp organization matters most. Objects used during the night are kept close enough to find in poor light. Fuel sits near the hearth. Tools remain within reach while dangerous edges are positioned away from sleeping children. Darkness rewards familiarity. You do not want to search blindly for firewood while half awake. The wind continues for several minutes and sparks lift from the embers when someone gently exposes hotter coals beneath the ash. Orange light returns. Your eyes sting as smoke briefly lowers across the bedding. Now another person coughs. Smoke is useful, irritating, and difficult to manage perfectly. Prehistoric people using indoor or partially enclosed hearths would have inhaled combustion products regularly, especially where ventilation was limited. Soot can also accumulate on cave ceilings and shelter surfaces. How serious the long-term health effects were is difficult to estimate. Exposure varied enormously with shelter design, fuel season, and time spent near fires. Researchers continue examining ancient respiratory risks through skeletal evidence, environmental reconstruction, and comparison with more recent populations using open fires. The details remain uncertain. Your companions simply know when the smoke becomes unpleasant. Someone shifts the fire. Another opening is widened slightly. The air improves. Problem solved, at least temporarily. Then a different sound comes from outside. Not a cough. Not whined. Something steps on loose stone beyond the shelter. One footfall. A pause. Then another. Everyone nearest the entrance becomes still. You are suddenly completely awake. Sleepiness disappears so quickly that it feels almost unnatural. This rapid transition is one of the body's useful survival responses. An unexpected sound can increase alertness before conscious thought identifies the source. Your heart beats harder. Someone beside the hearth reaches toward a spear. No one shouts. That would reveal more than it explains. The group listens. A faint scraping sound follows. Then silence. The night seems to wait with you. This is the difficult moment when incomplete information must be judged without allowing fear to invent too much. Perhaps a predator approaches. Perhaps an herbivore is passing. Perhaps loose stones shifted naturally. Experienced listeners compare the sound against countless remembered nights. One adult raises a hand. Everyone remains still. Then a familiar snort comes from outside. A hoof strikes the ground. The tension eases. Some grazing animal has wandered near the edge of camp before noticing human scent or fire. Several seconds later, rapid hoofbeats move downhill. The animal is gone. Nobody chases it. Night hunting opportunities can wait. Rest is valuable too. The spear returns to the ground. Bodies settle again. Your heart takes longer. False alarms like this may have happened regularly, though the frequency would depend on environment and camp placement. The important point is not that prehistoric nights were filled with constant attacks. They were filled with uncertainty. A sound needed interpretation. Sometimes interpretation required waking. That alone could fragment sleep. Weather produces more interruption. Rain beginning after midnight can transform a comfortable camp rapidly. Bedding must be protected, fire sheltered, and drainage monitored before water reaches sleeping areas. Snow brings different problems. Strong wind can damage temporary structures. A sudden temperature drop changes how hides are arranged. Cloud cover even alters visibility. Tonight the stars remain mostly clear, but you imagine another camp beneath rain. The first droplets strike leaves. Someone wakes. More follow. Within minutes, sleepers who expected several quiet hours are moving, hides shifting fuel and adjusting shelter materials in darkness. Prehistoric sleep depends partly on weather cooperation. Weather famously does not negotiate. Infants add another timeless complication. A baby wakes somewhere farther inside the shelter. The cry begins softly, then grows louder. A parent lifts the child close, rocking slowly while others remain half asleep. There is no concept of letting the baby preserve everyone else's schedule. The infant has different priorities. Feeding may follow, so may warmth, reassurance, or simple contact. Human infants wake frequently because their sleep cycles and feeding needs differ from adult patterns. In a prehistoric camp, caregiving therefore becomes part of nighttime rhythm. Other adults may help. An older sibling could wake. A grandparent might take the child briefly. Cooperative care can redistribute exhaustion as well as food. This is one reason social networks matter. No single person must solve every problem alone. The baby's cries finally soften. The camp grows quiet again. You notice how little irritation appears in the response. That does not mean everyone enjoys being awakened. Someone certainly does not. A sleeper farther away pulls a hide over one ear with unmistakable determination. Gentle sarcasm requires no language. Another interruption arrives from your own body. Your bladder is full. This is inconvenient. Leaving warm bedding means exposing yourself to cold air, stepping beyond the safest part of camp and navigating uneven ground without much light. You consider ignoring the problem. Your body rejects the proposal. So you rise. The hide slips from your shoulders and cold air wraps around you immediately. The ground feels harder than before. You move carefully, keeping within a familiar area and avoiding the scattered tool debris around the hearth. This mundane activity carries archaeological importance only indirectly. Where people relieve themselves can affect cleanliness, disease exposure insects, and camp organization. Whether Paleolithic communities followed deliberate sanitation routines is difficult to reconstruct. They certainly understood unpleasant smells. Beyond that, evidence becomes thin. Some habits may have involved designated areas away from sleeping and food preparation spaces. Others may have depended on short camp duration. Researchers cannot confidently recover bathroom etiquette from 50 millennia ago. Perhaps everyone preferred not to discuss it, so you return quickly. The bedding feels wonderfully warm after only a few minutes outside. Someone nearby shifts to make space. Within seconds, heat begins returning to your legs. You realize that every awakening makes the sleeping place more valuable. Warmth must be rebuilt. Position must be found again. The hide needs arranging. The mind must relax. Falling asleep is not automatic after alarm. You hear the river. A branch cracks in the fire. Someone breathes heavily beside you. The sounds that earlier seemed threatening now become reassuring because they are familiar. Your heartbeat slows. There is an intriguing scholarly question here. Some historians and sleep researchers have argued that pre-industrial humans may sometimes have experienced segmented sleep with an initial sleep period, a waking interval, and another period before dawn. Strong historical evidence exists for such patterns in some much later societies. Whether this structure extends deep into the Paleolithic is much less certain. Modern hunter-gatherer sleep research shows diverse patterns rather than one universal ancestral schedule. So it would be misleading to imagine every Ice Age camp waking together for a formal midnight interval. Reality was probably messier, and more human. One person wakes because of smoke. Another sleeps through everything. A child needs attention. An elder gets cold. Someone hears an animal. Someone simply cannot sleep. Overlapping interruptions create a night that is broken into individual experiences rather than one synchronized block that may actually improve collective vigilance. Again, survival emerges from variation. You lie still. The fire has stabilized. The infant sleeps. Wind weakens. No animal approaches. The camp gradually returns to a deeper quiet than before. This time sleep comes slowly. You are aware of each sensation fading. The grass beneath your shoulder. The hide against your chin. The smell of ash. The soft warmth from another body nearby. Then even those details begin dissolving. Before consciousness disappears again, you notice something has changed beyond the shelter. The darkness is no longer quite as complete. Far along the eastern horizon, a barely visible greyness has begun touching the sky. The night has not ended yet, but dawn is approaching. Section 19. The darkness has not vanished, but the eastern horizon is beginning to separate itself from the land. At first, the change is almost imaginary. Black becomes charcoal grey, and the silhouettes of nearby rocks slowly regain edges that disappeared hours ago. The stars remain bright overhead, yet the lowest ones begin fading into the growing light. Someone else notices. A sleeper lifts their head, looks east for several seconds, then settles back beneath the hide as though dawn has arrived too early to deserve enthusiasm. You understand the feeling. The night has been long. Your body feels heavy from repeated waking, shifting, listening, and trying to remain warm beneath layers of hide and crushed grass. Even without dramatic danger, darkness has demanded constant small adjustments. Now the world begins returning. A bird calls somewhere near the river. Another answers from farther uphill. Within minutes, the valley starts filling with sounds that were largely absent during the deepest part of night. Wings move through brush, insects change their rhythm, and unseen animals begin preparing for daylight. The transition is gradual. There is no switch. For people living 50,000 years ago, dawn is one of the most dependable signals in the environment. Its timing shifts with season, but its arrival reorganizes activity throughout the landscape. Humans are not the only creatures responding. Many nocturnal animals begin withdrawing toward resting places while daylight species become more active. Predators that moved comfortably through darkness may become easier to detect once shadows retreat. Visibility changes the balance again. You sit upright. Cold air touches your face immediately, and the bedding gives a dry rustle beneath your hands. Frost has formed on exposed vegetation outside the shelter. The fire looks tired. Most of the wood has collapsed into a shallow bed of ash and glowing coals. After hours of careful maintenance, almost no open flame remains. Yet the hearth is still alive. Someone kneels beside it and gently scrapes away ash. Red light appears underneath. A handful of dry material is placed over the coals, followed by several small twigs. The person bends close and blows steadily into the narrow space. Smoke rises first. Then a tiny flame catches. Morning begins with reconstruction. The fire that protected the night must now become useful again for warmth, food preparation, drying, and whatever tasks wait after sunrise. You hold your hands toward it. Heat feels unusually good after leaving the bedding. Nearby other sleepers begin waking in uneven stages. One adult rises immediately and stretches stiff legs. Another remains curled beneath a hide with the impressive determination of someone pretending daylight has not happened. A child sits up with hair standing in several directions. Some ancient experiences require no interpretation. The camp slowly becomes noisy. People cough. Someone yawns. A head is shaken free of grass fragments. Feet scrape across compacted soil as bodies rediscover movement after hours of rest. You smell smoke becoming stronger again. Underneath it lies damp earth, cold vegetation, old food remains, and the unmistakable closeness of many people sleeping in one place. Morning air makes everything sharper. The valley itself emerges in layers. First come the nearest rocks, then bushes, then the slope toward water. Finally, distant terrain becomes visible beneath pale blue light. What had been invisible for most of the night now looks almost harmless. That is one of dawn's tricks. A bush that seemed capable of hiding anything becomes merely a bush. The slope where stones rolled hours earlier appears empty. Nothing monstrous waits there. Yet the ground now reveals something darkness concealed. Tracks. Several prints cross soft sediment near the edge of camp. Someone bends down to examine them. You follow. The marks are fresh enough to have been made during the night, although identifying exactly when requires more knowledge than you possess. Perhaps a deer passed nearby. Perhaps the animal you heard beyond the shelter left these impressions. Experienced trackers can read far more than species from footprints. Depth, stride, direction, disturbed vegetation, moisture, and overlapping marks can reveal movement and relative timing. Tracking is practical history. The ground records who passed while you slept. In some environments, hunters can distinguish amazingly subtle signs that modern visitors would overlook entirely. A bent grass stem matters. A displaced pebble matters. Fresh drop-ins matter. The landscape contains evidence everywhere. Children learn these signs slowly through repeated exposure. An adult may point toward one print and explain something about direction or animal size. Another might correct the interpretation. Again, knowledge passes through ordinary moments. A quirky possibility appears when you consider the night's invisible visitors. Some animals may have approached camp after people settled, not because they wanted to attack, but because human activity creates unusual smells and discarded food. Small scavengers are especially curious. Foxes, birds, rodents, and other animals can investigate camp edges once movement declines. Future domestication may begin partly through such repeated ecological contact with certain species. But tonight the camp is not a petting zoo. Anything too bold risks being chased away. The exact nature of early human interactions with scavenging wolves remains especially uncertain this far back. Some researchers argue for very early stages of association, while others place meaningful domestication considerably later. The footprints in front of you settle nothing. They belong only to this morning. Sunlight finally touches the highest ridge. The effect spreads downward slowly. Cold grey stone becomes warmer in colour, and the frost along grasses flashes briefly before beginning to melt. You hear running water more clearly now. During darkness the river sounded mysterious because you could not see it. In daylight its location becomes obvious. That difference changes movement immediately. Someone walks towards the water carrying a simple container or folded hide. Another person checks stored food. Children begin moving farther from the bedding, though adults still watch them closely. The camp expands outward. At night, human life contracted toward fire and shelter. With sunrise, the usable world becomes larger again. People can inspect tools properly. They can travel safely over rough ground. They can identify animals at greater distance. They can gather fuel without depending on memory alone. Vision returns as the dominant sense. You notice how quickly everyone takes advantage of it. A damaged spear point that seemed acceptable by firelight is examined again. Its edge looks worse in daylight. Someone makes a dissatisfied sound. Apparently prehistoric craftsmanship also benefits from morning honesty. Another person turns a hide toward the sun, checking for dampness. Bedding materials are... Some grasses may be replaced if they have become wet or dirty. Temporary camps require maintenance even when everyone plans to leave soon. The morning also reveals where debris accumulated. Stoneflakes glitter around the work area. Bones from last night's meal lie near one side. Ash spreads slightly beyond the hearth. Children avoid the sharpest fragments because they have been warned before. Order returns. How long will this group remain here? Perhaps only another day. Perhaps several. Mobility among Upper Paleolithic people varied according to season, resources, group size, and landscape. Some camps may have functioned as brief stops. Others were revisited repeatedly. Archaeologists still debate how residential mobility differed between regions and periods because a single site can contain traces from many occupations layered together. One morning can become indistinguishable from another. That makes this dawn precious to imagine. For the people living it, there is no Paleolithic period. There is only today. Someone is hungry. Someone slept badly. Someone has work to do. One child is already playing near the shelter. Another remains wrapped in a hide and refuses to participate in civilization. The sun rises higher. Warmth begins touching the ground. You realize how much tension has disappeared from your body now that visibility has returned. Predators still exist. Weather can still change. Food must still be found. But daylight makes problems easier to locate. The landscape can be read again. A distant herd becomes visible along the valley floor. Several adults notice immediately. No one rushes toward it. They watch. Direction matters. Wind matters. Distance matters. Perhaps the animals will influence today's plans. Night has ended, but survival continues without ceremony. Before leaving the sleeping area, someone looks back toward the revived fire. The coals that survived to darkness now support new flame. That continuity feels important. The group did not merely endure the night. It preserved enough warmth, knowledge, energy, and companionship to begin again. You step outside the shelter. Sunlight reaches your face. For the first time in hours, you can see the entire valley without guessing what lies beyond the next few steps. The world feels larger. Behind you, hides are folded tools gathered and bedding disturbed by waking feet. Ahead, another prehistoric day waits. But before you follow it, one final thought remains. Night was never simply an empty interval between useful daylight hours. It shaped how humans slept, gathered, listened, remembered, protected one another, and imagined what could exist beyond sight. And after 50,000 years, some of those nighttime habits may still be quietly living inside you. Section 20. You remain at the edge of the shelter, while morning light slowly reaches the places that darkness concealed only minutes ago. The valley looks familiar again, yet after spending an entire night inside this ancient world, daylight no longer makes the experience disappear quite so easily. You now understand that darkness was never merely a period when prehistoric humans stopped doing things. Night shaped human behavior. It gathered people together, changed which senses mattered, encouraged cooperation, demanded preparation, and created long quiet hours when memory and imagination became unusually important. Some of those influences may still remain within you. You notice it when darkness makes an unfamiliar sound seem more threatening than the same sound during daylight. You feel it when a warm fire encourages conversation or when people instinctively move closer together during an uncertain night. These reactions have deep histories. Not every modern habit can be traced directly to one Paleolithic adaptation, of course. Human behavior is shaped by biology, culture, individual experience, and thousands of generations of social change. Evolutionary explanations can become dangerously neat. Still, there is little doubt that humans spent almost their entire evolutionary history without electric light. Artificial nighttime brightness on the scale experienced by modern societies is extremely recent. For most generations, sunset transformed the world. That repeated transformation may have influenced our sleep rhythms, visual expectations, social gatherings, and emotional responses to darkness. Your prehistoric companions have already begun their morning. Someone checks the horizon. Another person sorts tools. Children move around the shelter while adults reorganize materials that will be carried later. Nobody pauses to consider that their ordinary habits may influence distant descendants. They are simply living. That is usually how history happens. The habits that shape humanity rarely announce themselves as important when they begin. They become meaningful only after countless repetitions accumulate across enormous spans of time. Consider the fire behind you. It's a practical tool for warmth and cooking, yet it also changes the geometry of social life. People face one another around it. Faces remain visible after sunset. Stories continue. Children listen. Information travels. Anthropologists have long discussed the possibility that evening firelight created special opportunities for social communication and storytelling among human communities. Research among some recent hunter-gatherer populations has found that conversations around evening fires can become more socially imaginative than daytime discussions. That does not prove identical behavior 50,000 years ago, but the physical conditions are compelling. Darkness reduces many daytime tasks. Fire gathers bodies into a small illuminated space. Attention turns toward voices. The night creates an audience. Perhaps countless stories were born under circumstances much like these. Most vanished completely. No written record preserved them. No recording captured the speaker's voice. Even the languages disappeared. Yet the human tendency to gather after darkness and exchange stories survived long enough to create traditions that eventually reached campfires, hearths, theatres, books, radios, and screens. You are listening to one now. The medium changed. The instinct feels strangely familiar. Then there is cooperation. Throughout the night, nobody survived alone. One person tended embers, another comforted a child. Different sleepers woke at different times. Tools remained nearby. Food was shared. Bodies provided warmth. Knowledge about predators, weather, plants, and terrain circulated across generations. Human success has always depended heavily upon this ability to distribute problems among many people. You are not the fastest animal here. You are not the strongest. Your hearing is mediocre compared with many predators, and your night vision is almost embarrassing beside theirs. Yet humans compensate socially. One person notices what another misses. An elder remembers a route. A younger adult carries a heavy load. A child learns before needing to rediscover danger personally. Knowledge accumulates instead of restarting with every generation. That may be one of the most important stories of human evolution. Culture allows experience to outlive individuals. Nighttime gatherings may have strengthened that process. Historians and archaeologists still disagree over exactly when many features of modern human social behavior became fully developed. The archaeological record around 50,000 years ago shows important regional variation, and simple claims about a sudden universal behavioral revolution have increasingly been questioned. Human complexity probably did not appear everywhere at once. It accumulated unevenly. Different populations innovated in different places, while ideas could spread, disappear, and reappear. Your companions are part of that complicated process. They do not represent one universal prehistoric lifestyle. A group living near a tropical coast would experience night differently from people on a cold Eurasian steppe. A woodland camp would sound different. A desert camp would smell different. Predators would change. Food would change. Shelters would change. Even the stars would occupy different positions above the horizon. There was never one single prehistoric night. There were millions. That thought expands the scene enormously. While you stand beside this camp, other humans, thousands of kilometers away, are experiencing their own darkness. Some may sleep beside shorelines where waves continue through the night. Others shelter beneath trees alive with insects. Some endure snow. Some hear lions. Some listen to rain striking broad leaves. Some may be moving deliberately beneath moonlight rather than sleeping at all. Across continents, darkness creates different challenges, while human beings answer them with variations of the same remarkable flexibility. And there were other humans too. Around 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens did not necessarily inhabit the planet alone. Neanderthals still lived across parts of Eurasia. Denisovan populations existed somewhere across Asia, though their geographic range remains an active area of research. Other archaic human groups may also have survived in certain regions. Genetic evidence shows that Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. That fact gives the darkness another dimension. Somewhere beyond your imagined valley, different kinds of humans may also be gathering beside fires, caring for children, making tools, and watching the same stars. Their nights may not have felt so different. The exact nature of encounters between these populations remains uncertain. There may have been cooperation, avoidance, competition, exchange, conflict, intimacy, and different combinations depending on time and place. Genomes preserve evidence of at least some intimate meetings. History declines to provide the conversation beforehand. It is one of prehistory's stranger details. People once fell asleep beneath these skies without knowing that humanity would eventually become represented by only one surviving human species. To them, diversity among humans may have been an ordinary feature of the world. You look toward the sleeping area again. The grasses are flattened where bodies rested. Ash surrounds the hearth. Stone flakes lie where tools were repaired. Tracks cross the edge of camp. These modest traces are closer to what archaeologists actually recover than the voices, dreams, arguments, and jokes you imagined during the night. Archaeology begins with what survives. Survives. Understanding begins by asking what vanished. Wood rots. Fiber disappears. Hide decomposes. Speech leaves nothing. Love leaves nothing obvious. A whispered warning leaves nothing. A child waking from a nightmare leaves nothing. Yet these invisible parts of life may have mattered more to the people themselves than many objects that survived. That is perhaps the quietest lesson of prehistoric history. The most human moments are often the hardest to excavate. You can count stone tools. You cannot count reassuring touches. You can measure a hearth. You cannot measure how safe someone felt beside it. You can identify animal bones. You cannot hear the joke made during dinner. The archaeological record is extraordinarily valuable, but it is always incomplete. Imagination, therefore, has a role provided it remains disciplined by evidence and uncertainty. You should not invent certainty where none exists, but you can reconstruct possibilities. You know humans slept. You know they used fire. You know they made sophisticated tools, cared for children, occupied difficult environments, communicated extensively, and lived socially complex lives. From those foundations, a prehistoric night begins to feel less alien. Perhaps that is why you recognize so much of yourself here. You also seek warmth. You also become uneasy when something moves beyond sight. You also sleep better near people you trust. You also wake from dreams that feel real for several confusing seconds. And given suitable company, you may also sit near a fire far longer than intended. 50,000 years is enormous, yet some distances are surprisingly short. The sun has now climbed above the ridge. Frost begins disappearing from the grass, leaving small droplets that shine beneath morning light. The night is officially over. But before you leave this valley, allow the scene to soften one final time. The voices around you become quieter as distance begins opening between their world and yours. The stone shelter fades gently into pale morning haze. You no longer need to follow the hunters leaving camp or watch the children gathering beside the fire. Their day can continue without you. Instead, let your attention return to the night you have just crossed. Remember the little flame surrounded by enormous darkness. Remember dry grass beneath tired bodies, the smell of smoke caught in animal hides, and the cold air touching faces beyond the warmth. Remember distant wolves calling when nobody could see them. Remember the child sleeping safely between familiar bodies. Remember hands repairing tools while voices carried stories that would never be written. And remember the stars. For thousands upon thousands of generations, humans looked upward before sleep and saw darkness filled with the same distant light. Different names were spoken beneath those stars. Different languages came and vanished. Families moved across landscapes now buried, flooded, frozen, or transformed beyond recognition. Still night returned. People gathered closer. Fires lowered. Voices softened. One by one, eyes closed. Perhaps tonight your own room is quieter than that prehistoric shelter. There are no hyenas calling beyond the doorway. No one needs to preserve embers until sunrise. You can allow the darkness around you to become simple again. The ancient valley is fading now. Its river grows softer. The final ember dims beneath a layer of ash. Cold wind moves gently through distant grass, but it no longer needs your attention. The people beside the hearth are resting. Someone else is awake. The fire is safe. The children are warm. Nothing is approaching through the darkness. Above them, stars continue their slow journey toward a morning, exactly as they did long before anyone measured their movement. And for a little while longer, you can simply remain beneath that ancient sky. No path needs to be followed. No tool needs repairing. No distant sound requires explanation. There is only darkness, warmth breathing, and the quiet sense that humans have been falling asleep beside one another for an almost unimaginable length of time. The valley disappears. The fire becomes a soft red point. Then even that light fades, and the night, once frightening and enormous, becomes peaceful enough to sleep inside.